I can't do too much drum roll. I'll shake the microphone and the camera.
All right, well, that's us live then. Hi, everybody. I hope you're all enjoying yourselves. You've got a drink, you're comfy, you're ready for this conversation that we're going to have. This time round, it's going to be Angsherman's topic, so I'm going to just hand it over and you can take it from here.
Oh, fantastic. Straight off the bat. Thank you so much, Highland G, for having us on as always. It's always a pleasure to be here and be hosted by you. And good to see Matthew. Happy New Year to both of you and everyone in the audience as well. The way that we do these chats, it just has happened that Highland G, after running the show for I don't know, a dozen episodes or so, was just like, why don't you guys pull a little bit of the weight as well? So we're now taking the moderation and the topic sort of in a cycle. Last time we had Matthew talking about rereading comics. And so this time when it was my turn to pick a topic and prompts and questions, I thought that would be a good thing to go off of. So for today's episode of the Comic Jam, we are going to be talking about a comic that we haven't read in 5 years, a separate comic for each of us, not one comic that all three of us haven't. Well, see, here I go with the caveats automatically. But of course, what we wanted to talk about is let's talk about a comic. Let's revisit a comic that we have not read in a while. First, we thought 10 years, and then it was too much, and finding one might be very difficult. So we settled on 5 years. So today, we are here to talk about revisiting a book that we haven't read in 5 years. And we have a number of questions and prompts to take us through this topic. And I'm hoping that we go through them kind of rapid fire, but feel free to go back and forth over them. But before we get started, I'd just like to ask any caveats, any disclaimers, because that's the way I like to start things. As always, like, do you guys just want to actually, and please make sure you keep this in mind. Is there any sort of annotation we want to do before we jump into the topic proper?
No, except for unlike you guys, I went with the like almost 10-year type thing. I didn't go down to 5. So yeah, mine's a little bit
All right.
longer, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's great. And I mean, one of the things that I was thinking about is for me, given just the number of comics I have and the number of comics I've accumulated over the years, given the frequency of rereading being lesser when you're buying new, I had like almost I was spoiled for choice. I mean, I don't know if that's a good thing or a sad thing, that there were a number of books that could have easily qualified as books that I hadn't read in 5 years. So for me, I actually had to sort of, and Ashwita helped me with this, I had to try to portion it and see what kind of categories I could make. So I would say there could be Marvel DC books, or they could be sort of indie-ish. So you have Marvel DC, or you have Dark Horse Image, or you have like other publishers, Fantagraphics and Drawn and Quarterly or manga and things like that. And then I had the other categories like, do I think about a long series, or do I think about something that's a mini series and then pick like a part of it to reread for this exercise, or do I pick something that is standalone? So, like I sort of had to, because I had so many choices, that was the way I decided to approach it, to say that what would be the most interesting for our conversation and what would be the most, variety that we could bring to it. And then the final choice that I had, and this one was actually the big one, was do I keep it light or do I take it heavy? And I think that was the decision I had to go with. So, those are my caveats. This is the way I approached it. There could have been many, but my final choice ended up coming as a trickle down from all of these things. What about you, G? Did you have any such mental gymnastics that you had to go through?
Yes,
Like
I guess
nobody
a
has to go
little
through.
bit is. So like, I reread a lot of things. It kind of goes into our kind of prompts a little bit, but I'm just going to mention it anyway. It's like I reread a lot of things mostly when I upgrade them. So I think we mentioned it in the last kind of like thing is like, so a lot of the time what dictates the time between my first read and my second read can be how long it takes for the book to get a better format. You know, like it's not necessarily something that I'm deciding. So that kind of came into it a little bit. I was like, do I choose something that I would normally kind of like reread at this kind of stage, or do I choose something specifically for this chat, you know, that I wouldn't have reread at this kind of point in time? And then the other thing a little bit for me was when I was taking notes, rereading the book, like how niggly do I get with things? Like how many details do I kind of go into? Like if there's like a specific, you know, speech balloon that I think the wording's slightly off in that I noticed this time or something, like should I kind of bring that up, or is that going too far? So like things like that was a little bit. So some of my notes, I kind of became less picky about the absolute specifics and more about I guess a general feel that I got from things, and maybe like just took a little bit of a step back from that, because it could become like a really in-depth review of a singular book, and I didn't really want that to become the
Right.
focus as such.
Because we're really known for keeping things very short and snappy and not going into any details at all, right? So I completely get it, you know. I mean, 15-minute live streams, that's what we're known for on this chat. So yeah, appreciate you keeping things short and light, Highland G.
I mean, I'll probably bring stuff up anyway, but
Yeah. No, I think, I think we do have a list of questions. I don't know if we want to go over the list of questions right at the beginning, as this is the format of what we're going to do, or go through them one by one. We could immediately start with, first of all, just quickly go around and say, what is the book that we ended up picking? Why don't you get us started, Highland G?
So the book I picked is something that I've been waiting to reread. I've got upgraded recently. Is Birthright. So this is the first hardcover. It's the first half of the run, so I believe it's the first 25 issues. And as far as I can tell, I picked up and read the last trade of the run roughly around 6 years ago. So the first half of that run would have probably been a little bit earlier, because I would have read the trades as they kind of came out. But yeah, so this was my choice.
And would you just give a little bit of information on the authors and the publisher of Birthright, just for anyone who may not be familiar?
Yes, the publisher is Image. I think he's actually part of Skybound, it's part of Image, but yeah, it's Image. And the writer is Joshua Williamson, who is pretty big in DC right now. He's looking after a lot of that kind of side of things, just like G.I. Joe and stuff like that for Skybound as well. And I believe he's taking over Iron Man very soon, if not started already. So he's going to be doing stuff for all the different publishers. He's doing really well right now. But what I knew him from was Nailbiter, the sort of comedy horror series.
Nice.
Yeah, and that one must have been. If you read the trades right when they came out for the first ones, that's probably close to 8 years ago, Highland G. Because I think that was probably like a 2016, 2017 when those were coming out single issues. So it wouldn't have been long after that. And Williamson, because I'm still getting new, picking up single issues. And Williamson and Snyder are really kind of creating the DC future as to where it's going right now, and Wade to a certain extent. But Williamson's got his hands in everything as far as helping to drive where DC is going right now. They've really given him the reins to a certain extent.
Yeah, after his Flash run, they basically just handed him the reins and said, do whatever you want to do. So he's kind of done a lot of different things. Another book that I would note that I really enjoyed of his fairly recently was the Robin run, which is just like standalone run on Damian. And the main sort of like first story arc of it is basically Mortal Kombat. Like he gets given a coin and taken to an island and has to fight other people. And there's like the caveat within DC Universe is that they don't actually die. It's a Lazarus Island, so they can bring them back. But it's basically just Mortal Kombat. Like he gets to fight people to the death, and it's really good fun.
Yeah, he's. I think he's also in. They do an Action Comics and Superman. I can't remember. There's at least three Superman titles going on right now, and it's Mark Waid, I think Williamson, and Dan Slott. So we've got like these really, really great creators putting forth a lot of good stuff from Superman. So, yeah. Yeah, and I'll mention mine then. Yeah, so going off of what For the Love of Comics started, when I was thinking about this, I have a list of maybe 15 graphic novels that I've either want to read that are either brand new or rereads. And so when I read a series, I read one of those, then I add something new to the list. And so I had a couple on here that were like right around the 10-year mark that were rereads for me that I had wanted to revisit. And then a couple where I looked at them and I was like, oh man, I really want to reread Paper Girls, but it was 4 years ago the last time I read it. And so the first one I thought about was Lock and Key from Joe Hill. And was it Gabriel Martinez?
Gabriel Rodriguez.
Rodriguez, thank you. Yep. So I thought about rereading that and then decided not to. And then I thought about rereading Lemire's Moon Knight run. So I went from IDW to Marvel. Lemire did that 12-issue Moon Knight run back in 2016. So it would have been 10 years, just under 10 years. And that one I just remember because I remember seeing the cover for Moon Knight in a straitjacket. And I was like, it was Smallwood's art. And I was like, oh, I don't care what's going on. I'm picking that up no matter what. And it's a crazy 12-issue run by Lemire. And then I shifted gears, and what I decided on was a different Lemire title from a different publisher, but I went with the library edition of Black Hammer. And so part of the reason I went this route was Black Hammer was released in July of 2016, and I was picking that up in single issues and reading it there. So I'd been wanting to read it for a long time. I only read the first run, so it was like 12 or 14 issues if you include the giant size. And I've got the 3 library editions of Black Hammer, and I've got the 3 World of Black Hammer library editions, and I've got the Justice League Black Hammer crossover, and I haven't read them. And they've been on my list for a while. So it was like, what a perfect time to like force myself to go in and reread it. So yeah, that's what I ended up choosing.
So this is a reread, but that will launch you into reading something you haven't read before?
Yeah, it's 2 things. So yeah, it's a reread, but it's now, I'm rereading it in graphic in the library edition. So one, the size, the artwork is all blowing up. I'm able to read 3 or 4 issues at a time when I sit down instead of getting a monthly. So it's a different reading experience. And then now this will allow me to launch into the rest of the series, which I have not read yet.
Right.
You wanted to, yeah.
Very cool. Very cool. And I mean, yeah, I just described that I went through that entire process of elimination, etc. I could have gone with some of those Marvel comics that Marvel and DC comics that got me back into because I was trying to go back, ages. I was trying to go back a long time, but I could have read the Vertigo stuff. That was my gateway into a lot of more mature comics reading at a certain point of time, or at least discovery outside of things. But at the end of the day, I did go a more independent but also very lauded sort of route because of various reasons that I'll get into. And the book that I've picked is Can't We Talk About Something More Pleasant by Ross Shast, which might end up being what you guys comment on when I start talking about this book.
Is that the title of this podcast, the title of our stream?
Yeah, this is just the title of my pick, in more ways than one, is I could have very easily, I think, picked something more pleasant in some ways and less serious. But this is what I ended up going with, because as soon as I saw this and I started thinking about the questions that we have set up for ourselves, it was hard for me to think about something else fitting the way that it would, So I think with that, I think, what do you guys think? Do you think we should review the questions once for people in the chat to say these are the questions we'll be going over, or do we just want to launch into them and deal with them as we go? I'm open to either.
I think we just roll with it as they come up. That would be my suggestion, but I'm good with either. And I just want to say, I thought you were going to pick a Jason. I thought there was going to be a Jason title for sure. I was thinking back and I'm like, I bet he's going to pick. And then obviously your Earl Grey stuff I saw. And I was like, okay, so he's probably not going to do Jason because he's just covering it. So
yes, and this is one of the things that I think, Highland G, we talked about last time, and you brought it up now as well, is that when we make videos, we revisit things. So anything that I've made a video on in the last 5 years, automatically gets disqualified because I reread it and looked at it. So there'll be certain things that'll be just outside that 5-year boundary. But that was another one of those categories. Do I talk about something that I have talked about online on my channel before, just more than 5 years ago, or do I talk about something that I've never talked about before on there? Now, this is, I have mentioned this book a couple of times, but generally in live streams and in conversation, I've never done a spotlight on it or talked about it as part of any top 10 or something like that, because that was another one of those things I was thinking about.
I'm excited. I've never heard of that title. I honestly, full disclosure, it's one that's going to be brand new to me. So it'll be interesting to hear about it.
Yeah, I've read Black Hammer, but Birthright is not a title I'm familiar with, and I don't think I've read anything by Joshua Williamson. So likewise, I'm looking forward to getting a bit of context as well. The name is familiar, but I've never read anything. But me, I'm so out of touch on these things anyway. So I look to all of you and people in the chat to keep me educated and up to date. But yes, so for everyone in the chat, we're going to jump into it with our first question. And our first question is, why did you originally pick it up? So whichever one our pick is, we're not talking about today's choice. We're talking about originally, whenever we bought it, whenever we first read it. What was the logic? What was the reasoning? What spurred you to originally pick up the book that we are revisiting today? Highland G, over to you.
So a little bit like what I was saying before was that I'd read Nailbiter and I just really enjoyed Joshua Williamson's writing. I guess I went through a period of time where when I first got back into comics, this is probably roughly 10 years ago at this point, I was reading a lot of Marvel and DC, like the current stuff. So I was reading Marvel Now and I was reading New 52 DC stuff. And I wasn't really reading much outside of that. I tried the occasional kind of image sort of thing, but I wasn't really going much outside of that. And then when I got much more into reading all the sort of Brubaker books and things like that, I started following specific creators more. And at that point, when I realized I liked a specific creator, I would look up their work rather than looking for the new Robin run or the new Batman run or whatever it was at that kind of point in time. So I don't think I knew too much about the book, to be honest, when I first kind of picked it up. The two things that probably the biggest driving forces is that I'd enjoyed Nailbiter and thought that was a really good run. And the main character, which you can't see too well on the front here, but I'll see if I can get a better image of him. This guy here kind of reminded me of Conan meets Klaus, if you've read Klaus, by Grant Morrison, and it just really grabbed my attention when I saw that art. So I was like, the art really pops. There's quite high contrast and fantasy kind of stuff going on, but also this character is something that, again, it's not that character, but in my head, I'm like, oh, I really, really enjoyed this book with a character that looks like that. So that came across as another positive reason to kind of pick up the book. But other than that, to be honest, originally picking it up, I didn't really know much. I was going in pretty much blind based on the writer and the art.
Yeah. Which is what, 80% of the time, the reasons why we pick up the comics we do. Sounds good. Blackpool, what about you?
Yeah, just a quick shout out. I see Terrence is in the chat. Good to see you, Comic Crack and Gore. And
hi everyone in the chat.
Yeah,
we've got Gore, we've got Comics versus the World.
Yep. It's interesting, and this is kind of when I think I've met some of these people, like Terrence, and I think even Gore, back in 2016. There were a lot of YouTube channels doing live streams during the week. I don't know if they've all moved to Twitch or if it's all just disappeared, but there was a Tuesday show, a Wednesday show, a Thursday show where people were just talking about what they were reading and comics. And it was a lot of single issue stuff. And so there were, I was involved with one from the comic board originally when it was me and it ended up being Daniel from Sweden and JT. this was, like I said, back in 2016. And it was interesting because JT was reading Birthright and just gushing over it left and right. I haven't read it, but he was hammering me to read it over and over again because he was picking up during singles. And somehow Black Hammer was on the radar from all these shows going on. And it was one of those that I was like, well, I'll give it a shot. And I think in the first issue, if I remember right, you've got a 9-year-old girl smoking cigarettes, and I was like hooked right away. Like there's the humorous part of it, and there's also something just about Lemire. I like Lemire's writing. I've connected with him, and I think the older he gets and the older I get, our reflections, our contemplative sides, I start to really resonate with him. And it started with some of the Black Hammer stuff that he was doing, and he just, that more emotional, character-driven story than just the capes and tights side. So that's kind of what got me into it, was just being involved with the YouTube community at that point when these were coming out. And I got a lot of fond memories around that time, because I remember like who shows I was tuning into on Monday nights, who shows I was tuning into on Tuesday nights. And I was working from home second shift. So I had my work computer and then a big TV with my laptop hooked up, and I was watching shows all night long, basically, when I was supposed to be working. So good times.
Good times. No, that's great. And I think to me, I've always thought about Lemire as a much more, because I guess the first Lemire I read was Essex County, and it remains one of my favorite of his books, if not the favorite. So it's like the raw emotion on it. All of the other stuff sort of came later, the more speculative and even superhero things for me, where I thought that, oh, he's a little indie black and white character, history of a town and culture sort of guy. So it's nice to see that stuff is always in his work.
Yeah, and he's
in some form or the other.
And he's dynamic enough where, like, right now, I mean, he's writing the main JSA title for DC Comics, so he's still writing superhero stuff. But what I really connect with more is, like you said, this contemplative Essex County and Royal City and those Black Hammer, those kind of titles that kind of have you turn inward a little bit.
Right. Yeah, and I mean, my choice, the reason I picked it is for that contemplative nature. This book, I think, came out in 2014 or 2013, and I picked it up shortly after that in a bookstore. So this is, back in the day. Like, so yeah, it's been almost, it's been about 10 years, because I think I picked this up in 2016. And Ross Chast is someone I knew, and I don't know if you can see this art style from the cover, is someone I knew from anthology magazines and, indie sort of collections. I think maybe Best American, but maybe Drawn and Quarterly or something that Fantagraphics had put out in anthology form, etc. But I'd never read any books of hers. But she had a nice, loose, squiggly, colorful sort of style that, it caught my eye because it was so handmade looking, it was so, but also because, this is where marketing is there, is that it is the winner of the 2014 Kirkus Prize in nonfiction. And it was shortlisted for the, it was named one of the best books of 2014, including by People, NPR, San Francisco Chronicle, Seattle Times, St. Louis Post-Dispatch, Oprah.com, Oprah.com, the Christian Science Monitor, the AV Club, and the Miami Herald. And I think it was a finalist for the National Book Award. So in 2015 or 2016, I was just like, wow, a comic book, got called out by all of these publications as one of the best books of the year and all that stuff. So over there, it was really that kind of thing, because I was a sucker for comics getting respect, and comics being something. So I really picked it up because it seemed to have this reputation, and I'd never read anything by Ross Chast, and I was like, okay, this is the place to start. So I was really seduced by the cartoony art style, obviously one thing, but in this case, it's just one of those things when you turn the book over and you see the back of it, and you're like, okay, guess I'm gonna go take a look at this.
It's so funny, Highland G picks Sword and Sorcery. I've got superheroes, and you go with the big brain stuff. Oh, the good literary fiction, like the hoity-toity.
Right. So we know who the pretentious one is in this group. You know, I need my pick validated by 50 media outlets before I do anything about my own opinion. No, but I do, you know, because at that time I was also discovering or rediscovering or discovering more of, you know, Chris Ware and Joe Sacco and, you know,
Yeah.
like people I had encountered in, you know, 2001, 2002. But then I was trying to get more of their stuff in and finding what else they had done. So I was picking up a lot of older anthologies because they featured people like Dan Klaus, etc. And because of that, I was discovering other people, you know, because they were also part of the anthology. That's where I discovered people like Richard Sala, you know, who would go on to become one of my big favorites because he was in the anthology with all these people. So Ross Chast was one of those people who I knew from sort of that underground almost, although not quite the 70s, 80s. I mean, like, but late 80s, early 90s stuff. You know, and apparently she's been making comics since 1978. So she's one of those OGs in American alternative comics or underground comics, etc. So for me, as someone who's trying to do my homework and catch up, it was like almost like a syllabus, you know, sort of thing. But yeah, I think we can talk more about these things in our next question. So that was question number one of why did we originally pick it up? And before our reread, you know. From our original read, a second question for all of us. What do you remember thinking of it originally? What was your original opinion? Or to be more precise, what was your memory of your original opinion? Matthew, you want to get us started with this one?
Yeah. I didn't remember a whole lot. It'll be 10 years in July of this year. So about 9.5 years since I've read, 9 years probably since I actually went through and read it. I remembered certain panels. And then when I was going back through, I realized that the panels I remembered weren't in the book that I was reading. So like my like the idea was there, but how I thought it actually unfolded from panel to panel and what I thought I remembered of like, there's a scene where Gail, who's 9 years old, she's, you know, a 50-year-old woman trapped in a 9-year-old body. And she leaves school at one point and breaks into a bar in the middle of the day and is drinking and smoking at 9. And I remembered it so vividly how I thought it was laid out. And when I read it, I was like, I don't remember that. I don't remember it being done this way. I remember it being a little bit different. So the impact was a little bit different. And it was because it's been so long, there were some issues where I was like, I don't remember 80% of this. Like I remember parts of it, but there's a lot that just kind of went under the covers. And so I was thinking back on like, I really only remembered like some key moments throughout. And then even like some of the people that came in, I was like, oh, I forgot all about this person, or I forgot about that person. So yeah, I was, I don't know if it's just old man memory or too many substances in my earlier days.
Or in the last 10 years. No, don't incriminate yourself on live streams. But I mean, you had a generally positive reaction to the work. Like you remember liking it and enjoying it a lot.
Yeah. I'll go back to that. I mean, I enjoyed it enough where I bought the library edition as soon as it came out. And then without reading, I bought 5 other library editions. I've still got, if I decide I'm going to read these, and if I decide I think there's 2 other ones I still have to pick up if I want to keep going with it. But I mean, I've invested enough where I've got the 3 World of Black Hammers, which I haven't read, and then volume 2 and 3 of the library editions that I haven't read. But part of it is it's such a different take on a lot of the capes and the superhero comics I was reading at the time to go and look at, well, what happens when they're not superheroes, when they're superheroes, but they're trapped in this mundane world and they've got to live these everyday lives. And so we get these, you know, these origin backstories of how they became superheroes, but it's really focused on the relationships. There's a lot of themes around like love and loss and kind of being seen. And there's some themes which I kind of forgot about around homosexuality. And just, there was a lot of good stuff in there that was like, oh, this is the this is what I like about literary fiction books. It's these connections, and it's not the action per se. And Lemire does such a great job at that for me. So yeah, I was head over heels for it when it came out, and I still think it's just as good, just as resonant.
Yeah. Highland G, have you read Black Hammer?
And no, I don't think so. I might have read like the first trade or something, but I think just the sheer volume of it was something that's kind of put it on the back burner rather than being something that I kind of jumped into. I have read Harrow County, but I haven't read the whole kind of Black Hammer. I guess because it was like became like a universe of stuff so quickly when they started bringing out the hardcovers. I was just like, oh no, I don't want to have to pick up like 7 different books in order to kind of get into this kind of thing. But
Yeah,
it's
what are the
something
two?
that does appeal.
Yeah, Blackpool, you said there are 2 that you still haven't gotten. What are the 2 volumes that are missing?
Yeah, so I think 4 and 5 of the lot, what they call it. So there's the library editions, right? And then there's the World of Black Hammer library editions. And I think it's 1 through 5 with the Black Hammer main titles. And then the World of is like Sherlock, Frankenstein, and they get into some of the villains and stuff like that. And then there was also by Dark Horse, the Black Hammer Justice League crossover as well. I'm not sure if that's included in one of those. I've got the
Because they not have like guest writers and artists for some of the like spin-off stuff as well.
What was that?
Did they not have like guest writers and artists for some of this stuff as well?
Yeah, it eventually got to the point where it turned into, so Dean Ormston does the main work in here, but there's the giant-sized issue, which Dave Rubin does. And then as it went on, other writers joined on board because, Lemire's time became pretty valuable because I think he was wasn't he doing a TV show for Essex County that aired, or he did the one on Netflix, right? With the animals. Sweet Tooth. Thank you.
Yeah.
And I think the fact that he was, he had his own stuff going on. He was getting in with some of the, like Marvel, like he was doing some of the Moon Knight stuff. He had Black Hammer. He's getting these TV and movie option type things that he's trying to put together. And I think he wanted to keep the world going. And so he had guest writers and guest artists come on and help out with some of the storytelling. Yeah.
Yeah. When I picture Black Hammer, I just think like almost like goofy takes on like really old school characters. Like I picture like the sort of Thor like type characters and stuff where they've got like old school like hammers and stuff like that, but they're really like his take on those sort of like really sort of retro takes on the characters, so they don't feel as modern as say like a current day Flash. They would feel more like a Jay Garrick, but it's his take on that.
Correct. He basically it's a love letter to the Golden Age and the Silver Age, in my opinion. This is the way I view it. So you've got Golden Gale, the little 9-year-old who's a 50-year-old woman in the real world, and all these superheroes defeat, I think they call him the anti-god, which is basically Darkseid. It's this big Darkseid looking villain. They defeat him, and when they defeat him, a bright light shines, and they end up on a farm somewhere. And they can't get around, like they can only go so many miles in any direction. And they find this out because Black Hammer tries to fly away and ends up getting basically zapped by this force field. And so they don't know why they're stuck in this world. And it's been 10 years. And then you get the backstory. And so like the Golden Gale, she gets this interesting backstory of when she says a name, Zaphram, she turns into Golden Gale. And she turns into the superhero. But then she's got the Golden family, I think is what it's called, which is basically a nod to the Flash family. They've got Black Hammer is basically a nod to Thor. So they've got these characters that are nods to these Silver Age, Golden Age comic heroes that we know. But then he's really putting them in today's present life, like their relationships. Like what happens if you took them and stuck them in a spot where they had to like live with a regular town and they're living on a farm. And so they can't be superheroes for the most part. And then there's this huge mystery around how do they get there? Why are they there? And he's able to jump back and forth a little bit between that origin story and the superhero. And really most of it takes place on the farm. But it's not it's a little more contemplative and a little more reflective than I think kind of campy-ish. Yeah.
Yeah. It struck me as like a sort of sad and it's like an elegy, but it's like the Umbrella Academy, but if it was like toned down in its because it's got this sort of family dynamics and these weird kind of relationships between the people, but it's also much more quiet, isn't it? Than being like loud and rambunctious and outrageous.
Quiet's a great way to put it. And part of it is each person. So there's 6 superheroes that are stranded here. And then Black Hammer's daughter eventually kind of comes back, Lucy. And each one of them has some kind of loss that they're trying to get back to as well. For some reason, I've been stuck here for 10 years and I'm mainly with the same people in this family. So we get these family dynamics and these relationships. And they all miss something back home that they long for, that they can't have. So there's a sense of grief. There's a sense of loss. There's the family relationships where, Gail, who's 9 years old, has to pretend like everybody else is older than her in the house. And she's going to like 3rd grade for, the 7th or 8th year in a row or whatever it is, and just kind of fed up with stuff. So it's just a really interesting take to like take these superheroes out of their element and shove them together and see what the dynamics would be if they had to kind of live an ordinary life on a farm of all places.
Right. No, that's great. Highland G, what about you? What do you remember thinking about Birthright way back in the day? Not what you think of it now, but what do you remember thinking about it?
Yes. So I feel like I had a big memory gap of the middle of the run somewhere, where I remember how it started, and that's the key thing that stood out in my mind and made me want to kind of reread it. And I remember some of the subtleties in it, where although it is very much as I said, it looks like a kind of Conan bright swords and sorcery type kind of book. It is, again, similarly to what you were kind of saying, Blackpool, it is a lot more family driven when it kind of gets into things as to why the choices and things are made, that things kind of happen. And then the other thing that kind of stood out to me is that it's not always a lot of action coming from the bad guy's side. So something that I always kind of remember from it is that the bad guy was more of a sort of a talker, manipulator type person than someone who actually outright fought. He'd send people out to fight, but he didn't tend to get into a lot of fights in the book. If he ended up having to confront a hero or a character, he'd more manipulate them than actually like outright fight them, which is quite an interesting kind of dynamic. But the way the book starts is it's kind of like a split where you've got the fantasy world and you've got Earth, and the Earth story plays out a little bit like a police drama to begin with. So you get this quick arc of the dad's out playing with Mikey, one of his 2 sons, to distract him while the other son and mum is setting up for his birthday. And he throws a ball into the forest. Mikey runs into the forest to get it and doesn't come back. That's basically where the story kind of starts. And then we start kind of going back and forth between the fantasy world and Earth, because what happened is when he went into the forest, he got taken into the fantasy world. I forget what it's called even now, what the fantasy world's called. But basically, that's the kind of like contrast between the two. So you've got this almost Brubaker sort of crime story going on where everyone's blaming the dad for having either lost or killed the son. And then you've got the other story of the son in this fantastical world having to become this savior, which was put on him and it was never his choice. They just all say, there's a prophecy and you're the savior and you have to do these things. And he's like, well, I just want to go home. and they almost manipulate him in a sense of like, well, if you save the day, you can go home. But it always kind of comes across like they're lying just to kind of keep him there and keep him kind of going. So that's the start of the story. That's the main thing that, I really liked about the drawing, if you like, is those 2 aspects kind of playing off each other. And then as in the longer term, there's a lot of, I guess, moral things that I kind of remember from it a little bit, where the overall kind of tone that I got from things is, you can only fight and cross so many lines as a hero until you eventually become the villain. So where do you draw that line? and that was the other thing that kind of kept me kind of going. There was a couple of characters that I remember from the first time round not really connecting with. I don't necessarily think they were bad characters or badly written characters. I think sometimes in books you're not supposed to connect with everybody. You know, you're supposed to connect with certain people or find the characters that you connect with within it. But specifically the brother and his sort of female companion that Mikey kind of goes on the journey with in the fantastical world. I don't remember from my first read being that much of a fan of those two characters. So the middle of the book becomes a bit of a blur because all I really remember is the bits that I enjoyed of Mikey himself doing the various things, because I remember I'm almost blocking out those characters. So yeah, I guess that's the main kind of thing, is there was that kind of interesting contrast between the sort of crime / fantastical at the start, and then the fact that the book wasn't focused on being this big action, although there was a lot of action and cool art in there. I remember really enjoying the art. That wasn't the core meaning for the book. The book had a greater few morals and things kind of put in there.
And when you read it originally, you read the whole series, right, all the way to the end?
I read the whole series, but in trade as they came out, so there would have been gaps between trades.
Right. But did you have a clearer memory of the ending, which was something more recent than the middle or the? Because it's interesting that the beginning, which would have been the earliest trades and the furthest away in time, is something you do remember more clearly, even though it's technically the oldest thing that you read. Did you have a clearer memory of the ending, do you think?
That
was interesting to me,
not the
you know. It's just like, do you
specifics.
remember, even I remembered the start, you know, but then I'm just like, yeah, but like what about the rest of it?
Yeah,
is one of those questions that comes up to me.
I mean, as I said, I remember the ending being less a straight outright confrontation and more being a moral question. But I don't remember specifically the ending as such. But I think the start is easier to remember just because that is a core theme through the whole thing, rather than like a singular moment as such.
Right.
Well, I'll put in just to plug that, you know, the first, you know, kind of like thinking of it in terms of acts, right? If we're going to continue with it, that first act's really got to hook us. And I think that may be at least thinking back to Black Hammer, like I remember a lot more of the beginning issues, even though those are the ones I read, you know, longer ago. But those are what hooked me into it. And those are the ones that just were, because it was something kind of new and memorable, that's what really grabbed my attention. And then as the series went on, I still enjoy it. I really think it's great, but I don't remember as much of the detail. Like I said, I even forgot a character that was in there. So it doesn't surprise me that that first act really, for what we chose to reread, grabbed us, and that's what we remember.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, because they're sort of engineered to do that and stick in your head in a particular way. So, yeah, I mean, I think it was the same for me. But the interesting thing about this is I remembered what it's about, because obviously can't we talk about something more pleasant? It's, you know, and it's what the parents are saying to her, and it's an autobiography. It's about your parents aging and dying. So I was just like, oh, cheerful, you know, how, but the idea is it's really about aging in some ways. So I remember the beginning, and I remember the end, because the end is about their deaths, you know. So I remember that, and I remember being moved by that, obviously. But there were large parts in the middle which I know had affected me, like emotionally, when I had read it, but I had essentially forgotten until I reread it right now. So for me, when thinking about what I remembered about it, it was funny. Like I had this bookended kind of memory. I remembered how it started, and I remembered a couple of specific details about its start. There was a detail which I thought was in the first few pages, which when I reread, I found that it wasn't. It was a little into the second chapter. But when she visits her parents, and her mother has always been someone who keeps the house, you know, spotless and dusts it, and she sees the grime that has settled over the house, you know, the fact that the cleaning has just gone, you know, and I remember that being so evocative, and it made me feel, all goosebumpy when I read that. And I could just recognize that there was this kind of like real human truth in that observation. I remember that. And then, of course, I remember the end. And, but the parts in the middle, which I knew were harrowing, had somehow sort of like, I had a sense of them, and I remembered how they made me feel, but I didn't remember the details until my reread this time, which I think is one of the things we talked about last time of why rereads are so important, is because we sort of end up with these averages and summaries and conclusions that we carry with us, but the reasons for them or the details behind them often get lost in that, that shuffle of memory and time, and revisiting them. I think, and that's what we can talk about next, is like revisiting them can sometimes change them or adjust them considerably.
Wait, let me ask one question from you.
Yeah.
So the title of the book, is it nebulous of who's asking it, with the parents or the child, or is it? Yeah, I'm just curious, because it could come from either side, or is it the idea that both of them are holding it?
Yeah, like I mean, on the cover they show like the dad asking that, can't we talk about something more pleasant? But it also starts with this notion of her parents don't want to talk about death, and they don't want to talk about how to handle it, or what to do after they're gone, or make any so she gets. But it is interesting, because it's right there at the beginning of when she's like, do you guys have any plans? What do you want? And they're just like, what are you talking about? And you're so silly, and all of that kind of stuff that goes on. And then and she's like, fine, let's not just talk about it. We'll just que sera, whatever will happen. And, we don't need to talk about it. But the last panel, and this comic is structured like a diary, a journal, but it also is like one-page gags, like old newspaper, Sunday, like pages kind of stuff. Like it's a one-page gag, but the last panel, which is where the punchline is delivered, is sort of a split screen of her and her parents in both of their houses separately, going phew, as if she is as relieved as her parents that they didn't have this conversation, and that's sort of the first page, the first joke that starts this. And that's what that end panel is, when so this is like you can see on the other side there's a photograph of her parents and her, a real, like it's a photograph, and over here is the cartoon representation. So it automatically sets the tone as being a cartoony Sunday comics page version of real life, and sort of presented in that way. But yeah, that's a good intro. That's like a prologue before we get into the thing. But yes, it's there is largely this denial of what's coming, and something, and then she goes into the reasons why, or possible reasons why, both her parents being kids of Russian immigrants, and what they had seen and what they had put up with, and how much suffering they had gone through, and how much death they had seen, to the point where they just don't want to talk about it at all, including their deaths. And they and they're old, and they're very old, and they get very old as the story goes on, and things get worse and worse health-wise, etc. As I said, quite a cheerful thing. But the other thing that I remembered about this book was that it was funny, and I mean, that always stuck in my head, is that it's such a serious topic, and it's so grim in some ways, and it is. It's a grim, but it is full of humor, and it's this kind of observed humor about parents and about people being a particular way, but it's also this kind of almost like, what can you do other than laugh at certain things, so there's a sort of, it's not exactly gallows humor, but I remembered it being funny, and finding humor in very odd places. But just like that observation of that layer of grime and dirt, and it's just like that, it seemed very human and it seemed very well observed. I'll just say that Gore Vidal in the comments had said something about Day Tripper and revisiting Day Tripper. And Day Tripper is one of those stories that, again, you come back to it at different parts of your life and you find different things in it when you're older. And I think, that's what I felt like. This was well observed about life. I mean, the author themselves is old, but their parents are very old. And the parents were very old when she was born. They were like 36 when she was born. So, by the time she's coming into her 40s, they're already past their mid 80s. So it's that kind of dynamic. But the details of it I had forgotten, and like the exact ages, the exact difference, all of those kind of details, I had completely forgotten. I just remembered that beginning, with them being older but not wanting to talk about it. I remember the end of them dying about 2 years apart, and I remembered it being funny while being grim, and the rest of it I had to sort of rediscover this time around.
Yeah, just real quickly, just 2 quick comments. So yeah, 10 years ago, I don't think I would have resonated as much, but I have an aging parent now, and so I've seen like the infallibility of this parent who is now not able to keep the houses clean, not able to do these things. That really resonates with me at this age. I'm not sure what 10 years ago, but there's a whole in psychology. And I might have mentioned this at some point on one of our streams. There's a whole, it's called terror management theory. There's this TMT, this terror management theory that helps us avoid thinking about death, helps us avoid, we all use it and we don't know it. But in psychology, it's well known that we don't want to talk about death. Death is always something that's going to happen sometime in the future until we don't wake up that morning, or until we don't, until we actually die. And so we have all these ways psychologically that we avoid thinking about it. And this puts it front and center, which I love. I think it's great. I'm gonna have to dig for this one.
Oh yeah. It really does, in a very clear-eyed way. But again, with humor in a way that I don't think I've seen done in this way very often. It's superb in its use of humor, because it's not like making fun of anything, although it kind of is, where the mother will save the tea bag because there's plenty of juice left in it for another use and stuff like that, but also the sadness at the bottom of it, at the sadness because, I'll get into it, but the author did not have the same relationship with both parents, she was much closer. She liked one parent much more for reasons in childhood and things like that, and how that makes a difference in old age, and that makes a difference to how you process such things as well, like what things are bubbling up inside you and what things have been lying latent all this time. Those things also become a big part of it. So to find humor and to bring that sprinkling of humor to such things, I think, is also an incredible feat. But again, it's not like sitcom humor. It's like observed absurdity of life and how these things, exist right next to each other.
Yeah, it's interesting because it has to be done on a really fine balance too. It's like you want to balance the morbidity of death and not have just be sucked into a hole of depression, and yet we don't want to make just complete a farce of it. And so I imagine when it's done right, it's got to be just this really unique balance of when to interject a little bit of humor, when to deal with a heavy topic, and kind of that back and forth between the two.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the cover there, I think, is a perfect example of what it is,
Yeah.
It is, it's serious and funny at the same time. It's just like you can just hear her, being scolded by these parents. And here she's like a mid-40s woman. It's not like she's a teenager or something like that. So that idea, I think, is very, it encapsulates a lot of the work. All right, so this is why we originally had picked it up and what we remember thinking about it. Our third question for these books that we're rereading 5 or more years later. Our third question is, why haven't you reread it in the last 5 years? And I get the feeling that this might be one of those questions that has a short answer and a long answer. And the short answer might be a common answer for all three of us is there's a lot to read and there's a lot to reread, which is so that's like, so I would say that there might be a general answer to give into any book that you haven't reread. And that's, there's a lot to read.
Yeah.
And there have been a lot of other things that I have reread. So that's just a sort of arbitrary thing. So how about we treat this question, why haven't you reread this in the last 5 years, in a little bit more specific way? Is there a specific reason why you haven't reread this book or this work or this series in the last 5 years? Highland G?
I don't think, as far as like the story is concerned, there's a specific reason that I've held off on kind of rereading it. For me, it's mostly that I tend to reread things when I upgrade them. So only just in the last maybe 6 months, the second hardcover came out. I don't have it yet, but at that point, I can have the complete run as sort of 2 books that I can read through as one kind of thing. It's oversized. It's going to be, a better experience for me personally than going through 10 trades. And so for me, it was probably just waiting for that upgrade to reread it. As you mentioned before, there's all the usual things. If there's other things I want to read, there's other books coming out. Even by Joshua himself, like there's stuff that he's constantly bringing out, newer kind of things that I'm like, well, do I want to go read the older one, or do I want to kind of read the newer one? Because the most recent one that he brought out was called Dark Ride, and it's just come out in 3 trades. And it's about an amusement park that this guy basically themes after horror and the devil, and he's kind of partially sold or made a deal with the devil in order to kind of make this theme park. Anyway, stuff like that. I'm like, oh well, I want to go read that new run. So there's things pulling me to other books, and then I guess there was waiting for the upgrade to kind of push me to read it. I probably wouldn't have reread it as soon as I have until I had the second hardcover, if it wasn't for the fact that we were kind of doing it for this. But it was on the schedule, if you like, as soon as I got that second hardcover, which is not going to be far away now anyway.
Right. What about you, Matthew?
Yeah. I think the 2 things, I've talked about this a little bit before too. I get these things where I spend 4 or 5 years reading 85% novels and 15% comics. And then at some point it switches and I read 85% comics and the novels take a back seat. And so for the last couple of years, it's been a lot more prose reading. And it's shifted in the last like 6 to 8 months where I'm starting to see more and more. Thanks to you, I'm in volume 5 of Pluto right now. So I'm reading some manga as well.
Are you enjoying that?
Yes, very much. It's really easy to devour, so I've been slowing myself down. But between Pluto, Black Hammer, I've got single issues. So I've probably got 12, 14 titles that I'm pulling every month for single issues and novels. And then just the sheer number. The other big one for me is just I'm a real big mood reader. And so I may plan to read Black Hammer once I finish something. And then when I get done, something else has already grabbed my attention. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to wait and I'm going to come back to it. And inevitably what happens then is it's years and years later before I eventually get back to something. Just because I like to feed whatever the mood it is. I feel like if I force myself into a set, I've got to read these books because that's what I said I'm going to do. And I'm not really feeling it. It's just going to take away from my enjoyment. It's going to slow me down. I'm not going to want to read it. So I really go off a mood. This one, like I said, was on my list. The one thing when I had originally thought about, like, okay, I got all these books, IDW is Lock and Key, or the Lemire's Moon Knight. That one was paperback. So that was one of the things I was like, oh, it'd be nice to have a paperback I could hold up versus trying to hold up the library edition and show it off, But yeah, nothing specific outside of just I like to feed the mood that I'm in, and the fact that I've got way more books to read than I'm ever going to read in my whole lifetime.
Yeah, that's always. I think that's one of those answers. Is that I was keeping my mouth shut earlier, but I have read the 1.5 library editions of Black Hammer, but I do have 3 of them, and I haven't finished the second one or started the third one, and sometimes I feel really guilty. I'm just like, why did you buy it then, man? And now you're telling me that there's volume 4 and 5 out there. I'm just like, what do I do? Do I buy them and not read them the way I have not read 3? Or do I put it up there as an aspirational thing to get to? But yeah, I think, and we've talked about this before, but, there's a quote I like, or like a joke maybe, where someone says, have you read all the books in your shelf? And someone says, no, and I haven't drunk all the wine in my cellar either. So I'm just like, okay, let's use that as a line. It's like, these are just bottles that we are saving for, great occasions and things like that. But I think sometimes you might think about rereading as saving things. And I think sometimes I think about rereading as, oh, it's too recent. I want to give it a big gap before I reread it. But you never know when you reread it. You might end up rereading it, just because the mood struck you or something.
You've changed my approach on that to a certain part after our last discussion about like some of these books, when you reread them, if it's something that really grabs you, maybe you want to revisit within 6 months.
Yeah.
I've always been one of those, like, I want to give it space and let it simmer. But then you really maybe rethink about some of that as far as like, oh, maybe I want to reread some of these a little quicker than I have. And, I did the numbers last year. I read 88 books total last year, and probably 10 of them were graphic novels in that form. So the rest were prose. But I bought 145 prose books last year. So figure out, like, I'm never going to catch up if I keep doing this, right? Like, it's just, it's insane, some of this collector habit. And so I've really slowed down. So this is a side note, my goal this year, and I'm currently in the process of it. Today's the 17 days in. I'm doing this 50 book pause for prose books. So I've got to read 50 prose books from my shelves. So if I get one from the library, it doesn't count. 50 prose books from my shelves. And then when I get to that point, then I'll allow myself to buy 5 more. And so that's the way I'm trying to like get through my prose. I excluded graphic novels. I can buy as many graphic novels as I want, so I can still feed that demon, which I don't know if it's a good
sales don't count, because sales are just about, it just makes sense.
I woke up, it was supposed to start on January 1st, and I woke up really early January 1st, and I saw Barnes & Noble had like a 25% offer on pre-orders. So my 4 pre-orders for this year don't count either. So there was some fudging of the numbers.
Sure. We're all great with numbers when it comes to fudging them. No, I think Gore Vidal says non-book readers will never understand why we have 100 books. I mean, I barely understand why I have 100 books. but yet I do, and I will keep having those. It does feel like a bit like there was a video game reviewer who was once talking about the economy of some game, but he said that's like trying to stop a wave of cash by throwing more bags of cash at it, and it feels that way. Like, this is how I'm not solving the problem by putting more books on the shelf. That's just becoming more and more intimidating, and I'm just like, oh, if I put more books on the shelf, then somehow that will make me read more. That's not going to make sense. But yes, I think that that's what I was thinking, is that there is always for us that, well, there's a lot to read and look at all this other stuff, but I do feel like rereading is where the true appreciation of something is born for me. This is and I think this has been proven by this exercise even more, where the reason, if there is a reason why I didn't, like, what's the question? Why haven't I reread it in the last 5 years? Or in this case, I think closer to 9 years, maybe even 10 years. It's because of a number of personal reasons also. So, I mean, not to get too maudlin or something, but honestly, my parents got sick, and I didn't want to read this book when my parents were sick. And they weren't old, as as you know, like I mean, I keep saying I'm old, but my parents were old. But my dad passed away in 2020, and my mom passed away 3 years later in 2023, and it was very sudden, and it was like not at all expected, and it was because of illness and very very rapid deterioration. And although this book is about extremely old parents, that rapid deterioration after a certain point and going from seeing someone healthy and walking around and just perfectly normal interacting and then suddenly sliding to that end in that way was like, I don't want you to visit something that is so much about that. It almost seemed like, what's the need? At the same time, a little bit of a peek into the next question. The next question of ours is, how much thought have you given it over the last 5 years? I've given this book a lot of thought over the last 5 years. In fact, even like 6 or 7 years ago, or I don't know, 5 years ago, when I noticed grime, at my parents' house, I was like, I immediately thought of this book. And now it's like, I don't remember, is the book memorable and that's why I remembered it then? Or is it because I saw that at my parents' house that I remembered the book? Which one is it? I'm not able to put that thing together. So for me, apart from like, oh, there is all this and all that stuff, it's like, it's a unique thing in which I also felt like I didn't need to reread it because I felt it was absolutely fresh in my mind. I felt like, I remember it because and that's what I meant, is that I've talked about it. I've talked about it on live streams. I've talked about it when people have asked me books about grief or books about loss, etc., etc. I always name Day Tripper and I always name this book, no matter what the other books on the list. So it's an interesting thing where it hasn't been far from my conversation and it hasn't been far from my thing, but I've always felt like there's no need for me to reread it, which is why for this exercise, when we were looking at the shelves and I was trying to figure out, when I got that, and I was like, actually, I'm going to pick that because let me test to see if my memory is that good. Has it really seared itself into my brain to such a level that I'll remember every single thing? And interestingly, it wasn't true. I hadn't memorized everything. It wasn't seared into my brain, and it was a completely different experience reading it. Obviously for that reason. So yeah, so that's my answer for not just this question, but the next one as well, which is, why? How much thought have you given it? To me, in this book, I have given it a lot of thought. I've thought about particular scenes from it, but also the larger kind of story that it tells. And I've felt sort of familiarity to it, but also knowing that it's very, very different. There's old age home and all of that stuff over here, which had nothing to do, like, there's no similarity with me as far as that is concerned. There's like very old parents, they're like 95 and, 90, 93 or 95, something like that. So it's not at all the same thing. But it's interesting to me that I felt, I remember it so well, and it's so raw, and it's so moving in a very massive way that I don't need to. I can read something lighter or read, and it's not like I've only read light stuff. I've read like other heavy stuff. Blackpool, as you were saying, I pride myself on being the pretentious big brain guy. So, but it's like, for some reason, this was the one that I was just like, nah, it's okay. I'll read about war or something to take the light reading on.
Yeah, well, it seems like it was so close to you with what happened with your parents recently, and just maybe you want to answer this in a follow-up question, which is one of the questions you have later on. That's fine. You can pass for now. I'm just curious, did it help alleviate, help add a little, like, make more sense to what had happened with your parents? Did it bring a little relief or anything for you going back through it?
No, not really. But not in a bad way, I think like, I think like it doesn't comfort you, other than, I think empathy is a comfort, to know that other people go through these things. Everyone will go through this thing in some way or the other.
Can I put a plug in there? Yeah, it's the people who do compassion research. When we suffer, when we get into despair, it's when we think it's all about us. It's personalized, and we lose the fact that it's a shared common trait of humanity. If you're born, you're going to die. From the moment you're born, you're one less breath. Every breath towards death is just part of what we shared. So it does make sense.
Yeah. So so I wouldn't say, and we can talk about it later, of course, but I wouldn't say that it, sort of helps in that way, because it sucks no matter what, and it sucks for her, and it sucks for me, and it sucks for everyone who goes through it, etc. That part of it remains unchanged, but the you get to step outside your skin and occupy someone else's skin, which I think all great literature does, and it doesn't have to be an autobiography. It can be sci-fi, it can be fantasy, if it's like a good piece of literature, it makes you walk in somebody else's shoes and puts you into somebody else's position. And I think that part of it is uniquely affecting if you feel you can relate to the situation in some ways. But I think it's just a variation on the same kind of empathy that most great literature will create within us. But yeah, I think there are some interesting observations about that. But before that, Highland G and Blackpool, how much thought have you given the comics over the last 5 years that you haven't read?
Well, I was going to say just quickly, I was thinking a similar thing to what Blackpool was kind of saying in relation to like music and things. Like I've known people when I was growing up that if they were going through whatever at whatever time, they'd be listening to music that really sort of like had that tone. And for some people, that was, as you said, kind of like it gave them this sort of like empathy that somehow allowed them to either feel better or at least feel that they weren't the only person going through those kind of things. But then there was also people who would just avoid that like the plague because they just don't want anything else piling on top of what's going on, internally. So I find it interesting to see how that, affects yourself, or how that affected even just your choice as to whether or not you were going to approach it at a different period of time, because I think that's a very personal thing.
Yeah.
As far as the question, which one were we on again? The giving it thought over. This one?
How much thought have you given it over the last 5 years? Yeah.
So for me, it has popped up a few times as far as more because I watch other streamers and things like that. So if other people are picking up the book for the first time or stuff like that, and they're really enjoying it and getting kind of hyped about it, like Blackpool was saying that, when JT was reading the single issues kind of to begin with, that gets you kind of a bit kind of pumped. So there's this kind of slight conflict where, for what you were saying, a little bit, Angshuman, where it's like, well, I don't feel there's a big enough gap for me to go back and reread it, like 2 years after having read it or something. I still feel like it's fresh in my mind. But at the same time, this person that I've just watched for like half an hour, gush about how amazing it is, I'm like, well, do I want to at least read part of it? So there's been a bit of that. And then just generally, other than the one sort of I've blanked what it's called now, the New Year sort of theme park one that he's kind of brought out as an independent book. He hadn't done independent stuff in quite a while. So from that perspective, even though I like his DC work, I much prefer Josh Williamson's independent stories. I feel like they always have a little bit more of a like hidden undertones and things in there that you don't necessarily get in a superhero book. Some people can do it. I mean, like Jeff Lemire always fits family in regardless of what book he's writing. But I find with Joshua, sometimes he does, sometimes he doesn't with certain things. But there's always some little surprises and things that he does within his own things where he has that freedoms that he doesn't have in the kind of greater things. So every time I was reading one of his other books, like his Flash run was well over like 100 issues that I read through of kind of that. Every time I'm reading that, I'm being reminded of the other works that he's kind of done. So, so there's that kind of going on in your head, and you're like, well, I'm really enjoying this run, but at the same time, man, I remember there was that really cool scene in that other book that I was reading before. So like, I don't think I specifically was like, oh, I need to reread this soon. But there certainly were a lot of moments throughout the last sort of 5 years or so where I've been like, yeah, maybe I should revisit that a bit quicker than I was kind of planning to.
Yeah.
Mm.
It's
Yeah.
funny how that happens because, I mean, it happened with me a number of times with books, but it also happens with TV shows. And there was once, like a long time ago, I was watching 24. And, like I liked the first season and then blah, blah, blah. And I was watching it and it got ridiculous at some point of time. And it was really irritating me how stupid the White House scenes were. And I just stopped in the middle of an episode. I said, I'm just rewatching The West Wing again, because because I like The West Wing, I was like, that's a good White House show. And more recently, it was the same thing. There was some TV show that Ashwita and I started watching. I think it's called Department Q or something like that. And then this ex-cop, whatever, and they go and he starts a new department, and they go into the basement, and I'm just like, you know what? The Wire was a really good show in which they were given this room in a basement. And so yeah, I think things that are a little indifferent and that have make you recognize things, make you yearn for the stuff that's really good. And you're like, screw this. I'd rather watch, I'd rather be fishing.
Yeah,
Yeah, I can resonate with all that. Like even reading prose books, I've been paying attention to my mind as I'm reading through, and how often as I'm reading a sentence, the mind goes, oh, I should really go and revisit that. I remember reading that. And it's got to be like, I bet you it's like 8 to 15 books over the course of reading a novel that my mind goes, oh, you should really read this next. You should really, and there's, because I'm kind of my service work is in the area of mindfulness and some of the spiritual sides around it. There's some real juicy hooks to our mind thinking that we're going to get some kind of lasting pleasure and happiness if I go and do this right away. We always think it's the grass is greener on the other side. And so it's funny. I'll watch my mind just in the middle of a sentence be like, oh, I should go grab that. This should be next. This is going to be more, this is going to make me more happy. I haven't revisited. But it's constantly like that. And so for me with Black Hammer, the other thing that Highland G mentioned is it really resonates with me. The reason Lock and Key was on my radar was because I had recommended it to somebody and they read it and just loved it. And it was the same thing with Paper Girls. I'm like, oh, these books I've been recommending to somebody who is new to some of these titles, and they come back, oh, that was great. And I'm like, oh man, I should really revisit that.
Yeah,
and so,
especially if they give you some detail, like, oh, that elevator scene, and you're like, wait a minute, what elevator scene? Oh,
yeah. Yeah.
See, you're making me want to read Paper Girls again, even just you saying this now.
And it's funny because and I think that's I think part of it is when our mind goes to that, there was something really pleasurable about that first experience with that book or the second experience with that book that we want to get back out of there, that we want to go and do. And for me, Black Hammer, it's probably popped up a handful of times. I can't think of anything like any specific ones because, just looking at my shelves, like, I've got the Sixth Gun. There's 6 volumes. I think I've read one of them. TMNT, the IDW reboot, I've got 13 of them on the shelves, and I think I read up to 7. And so I'm like looking at my shelves and I'm like, oh yeah, I've got all the Invincible. I've never finished that. I really want to reread Chew. That's been on my radar. The new version of speaking of Gore Vidal, the new hardcover for Saga comes out in April. I've got 3 volumes that I want to reread before that. It's just
right. He's waiting with bated breath.
I know. I think he's been trying to like hold somebody at gunpoint to get an early version of book 4, So yeah, so it's been on my mind, but there's just how much I'm not sure because there's so many other books, and every time I walk in here, there's a series where I'm like, oh yeah, well, I really wanted to read that one, or a new title, I haven't read catches my eye. So constantly in flux of what I want to read next.
Yeah. No, but I can't, agree more. And I think Gore Vidal is saying that. I mean, although I see Mithun in the chat saying everything starts feeling like a copy of a copy of a copy, but that makes you want to read the best one, like it wants makes you want to read the one that's great, and I don't want to see the facsimiles or the rip-offs, like. So when I read something or encounter something that feels like a rip-off, and I think Highland G, that's what you're well, there's your saga reaction. But Highland G, I think what you're saying over there is really potent, is to say that this is a work by this author that you hold in such high regard that many other works by the same author can feel lesser in comparison, and it reminds me of a professor of mine, and I was like, oh, have you watched this new movie? And he goes, why should I leave my house and go to the movie theater and risk watching a movie that I'm probably going to get irritated with when I could just stay at home and watch The Wild Bunch again, And that was the same thing. That's what I was talking about in the last thing. It's the same thing. It's like, well, something great is going to reward you every time you revisit it. And something stupid or weak is going to just diminish as you're reading it for the first time. So it becomes a very natural thing to want to read something else instead of this when you know it's going to be so much better.
Yeah, that I just want to put a plug in that. That's interesting. The idea of the copy of a copy was it Joseph Campbell said that there's 7 stories. There's basically 7 stories that can be told, and then they're retold. And that's why I'd recommended this book to you off screen. This is Everlasting. It's an Arthurian tale. How many times has Arthur's story been told? This is going to be one of the top 5 books I've read that I'll read this year already. I'm almost done with it. But it's a retelling. But when it's expertly done, even if it's a retelling, it just adds to the canon of what's come before it and builds upon it. So yeah, it can be a copy of a copy. And I think the other thing that does is it forces me to investigate why it's so much better than some of the other ones that I used to love, or what it's doing differently. Where's the craft work and the difference? What makes it stand out a little bit? Yeah.
It could even just come down to the order that you read something. Like if it's the first one that you read and you connected with on a certain kind of level, or you have a personal thing that was in that book. So even though the story might be, I don't want to say generic, but like being reused in some way, the nuances of the story might have been the things that connected with you, and the nuances in the new story might not. Like I remember a lot of times where like there'll be like a new Tarantino movie announced or something, and I'll be like, nah, I'm gonna go watch Pulp Fiction. Because like whatever the theme of the new story was,
I'm just like I'm taking a shower and like I think I'll go watch Pulp Fiction now.
I just go and visit the GIMP in my basement. That's right.
No, but Pulp Fiction is such a great example because it like made the Matrix. It created like waves and waves of imposters, like, and there might be some people like maybe, Guy Ritchie's first couple of movies or something like that were okay, but they were still like that. But, just watch, and it's not like the Matrix was that original, but it just put the formula together in such a way that it took this Hong Kong stuff, etc. But the stuff that came out afterwards, it's the same thing with Watchmen, or The Dark Knight Returns, where people took the wrong lessons from it and said, ooh, let's have sexual violence, let's have, bloodshed, let's have, grim and gritty and all of this stuff without understanding the other parts of it, because those things are difficult to replicate. And these things, the superficial things, are easy to copy. So I think a copy of a copy is not the same thing as a really good version or an adaptation, because sometimes the adaptation might be better than the original. Sometimes the remake might be better than the original.
Yeah, that's what this is, right? I talked about it. It's a love letter to the golden age and the silver age. It's just taking these characters, these Thor versions, this Flash family, and just revisiting them in a unique way or a little bit different way, a different take on it. Yeah. I didn't think about it until we started talking about it. I'm like, yeah, that's basically what Black Hammer is, really. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that that idea of trying to recognize it from the point of view of the quality, you don't have to be the first to do it. You just want to be the one who does it best. That's kind of what you're looking for, is that the first mover isn't going to be the best. I mean, sometimes you give them credit for being the first, but there are going to be people who are going to refine that now that you've broken that barrier, now that you've opened the door. There'll be people who'll be able to play in that sandbox and create something a lot more complex. And it's just the way that I see it with, like, say, video games or board games, is that some generations ago, there'll be certain things that this mechanic alone is the entire game. And then today you'll be like, that's just 1/8 or 1/10 of the game.
Yeah.
And we've built all these other mechanics to kind of work with it, so it's not going to, it's not a good or a bad thing. It's just like, build on what has come before, use it, but then do something worthwhile in your adaptation rather than just copy the most simple, basic things that you can see. I think that's really good. So Highland G, what made you pick this book for this exercise? Given the kind of thought, and like, it's almost like a natural answer you've already provided. Is that's the one I kept thinking of when I was reading this other stuff. Was there other stuff that made you pick it for this exercise?
I guess the only other thing I'd probably add a little bit is that I've been on a little bit of a rereading spree, which started just before our last kind of stream, around the really early stuff that I'd kind of been reading, getting back into comics, and most of that is around X-23. So I was reading the omnibus for that, the NYX stuff, the X-Men stuff. Like, I've got loads of it, and I'd probably spent about the last month and a half, like, going through like most of that. And as much as I love that character, the first time that I read a lot of that stuff, I would have read, say, like, the first X-23 run is like one trade, and then the other one's like a separate trade, and then maybe you read like the long run down the line. So reading it all together was quite nice, but it was also almost like too much at the same time, of one kind of world or one character's kind of things. And so that kind of pushed me as well, as being, well, I want to read something that is more independent, not in Marvel's universe of kind of stuff, so that, it's just something that I'm reading that's a bit kind of different as well. Because I get bogged down when there's too much of the same kind of stories repeating and kind of going through things. So it's one of those reasons that when I started watching a lot of the Marvel movies when they started coming out, I kind of fell away from reading the comics, because I was like, I can't take in all this Marvel at the same time. It's just too much. So, like, I've always liked variety within my comics. I've read everything from, like, seeking out like samurai stories in comics rather than manga, to finding random mangas that I like, to independent stuff. And more recently, I've got into sort of hunting down Cineworld sort of translations of books and stuff that I want to kind of pick up and try. But yeah, I'll shift focus at different times, and I'll find that there's different things that maybe like draw me in. And I think Blackpool was saying earlier, where you might put like 2 or 3 books on a shelf and be like, well, this is the one that I plan to read next. When it comes to reading it next, it's really the emotional moment of you look at the shelf, and it's not even something that you're necessarily conscious of. You just look at the shelf, and there'll be 1 or 2 books that you're drawn to, and there'll be 1 or 2 books that you're like maybe pushed away from, just naturally in that one moment that you look at the shelf, and that can change every time. So there's been times where I'll have like 5 books on a shelf that I want to read next, and actually I'll be like, I don't want to read anything in DC, so I'm actually going to go out and buy an independent book, because I don't have any independent books I haven't read, or whatever the case may be, so that I'm getting kind of different stuff. So I always plan on revisiting it. I'm revisiting it a bit earlier because we were doing it kind of for this, but I think partly this particular choice was because it then took me away from being fully immersed in the Marvel kind of universe for a little bit, and gave me a bit of a breather. It's something that I enjoyed when I was in sort of previous jobs and I had longer lunch breaks. What I would have done is taken like a trade paperback or something with me to work, and I might be reading like a larger book at home and a trade paperback of something at work. So I'm reading like 2 books basically at the same time.
Sure.
which my partner Emma just can't get her head around. She's like, "How can you read more than one thing at a time?" And I'm like, "Well, how's it any different than playing like 2 different computer games or going between 2 different TV shows episode week to week? You know, like I don't. As long as I finish the issue, it doesn't really bother me. But I actually like the breather that you get between the two. So it might be that I don't get to the bigger book till the weekend, and then I'm reading the smaller random trades that work throughout the week as kind of breathers kind of thing. And that's partly what this was for me in a way. As much as it was a reread, it was getting a little bit of a breather outside of that sort of Marvel universe that I was fully immersed in at the time.
Yeah, it's kind of like what Gore had posted a little earlier in the comments. For me, anyways, the same thing. Like your partner Highland G wouldn't like me. I think I've got 6 books going basically all times. I'm dead serious. I've got Black Hammer, I've got Pluto, I've got the Everlasting for my fiction book. I've also got a short story collection going. I've got a spiritual book on the Dharma going. So there's always 5 or 6 books, and I'm always just kind of slowly chipping away at them. And 1 or 2 are really a focus. 3 or 4 days a week when I wake up, I read one of the short stories. So that book takes a little bit longer. But yeah, as long as they're different enough in genre, it's like you said, it's no different than watching 3 or 4 TV shows at one time, right? I'm watching a bunch of different things. So, and I don't remember what the actual question was, though. Can you repeat it?
Oh, yeah. The question is, what made you pick this book for this exercise? So, how much thought you've given it over the last 5 years, but why Black Hammer for this?
And for some reason, like when it comes to book things, I like to be, I'm okay with breaking the law left and right. I have no problems with that. But when it comes to book related things, like the first thing came out was like the 10-year thing. And I was like, oh, what haven't I read in 10 years? And so I started grabbing, it was Lock and Key had been 6 or 7, but it was the Lemire book and this one and the couple that I had. And then I looked at what I had really been interested in rereading. And so it was a pretty easy decision once I narrowed it down to the 3 or 4 books that really kind of fit where I wanted to, that time period that I had access to really easy. The big hang up originally between, the Lemire book is 12 issues. The Black Hammer one is volumes and volumes and volumes. So it was a little bit of getting my head around, okay, I'm going to make a commitment and I'm actually going to go through it at this point.
Right.
Hopefully we'll see, it's one of those where I may get a volume or 2 in and then I forget about it for a while and come back to it. But if it goes too long, I like to start the series over, like Highland G said. And some of these long series, like now that I've got 13 volumes of IEW's TMNT, it's really kind of daunting to look at it and want to start it because I want to get all the way through it this time instead of just stuck at numbers.
The spines look so pretty 7. Right next to each other, don't they?
Except only 12 fit on a shelf. So the 13th one is in the shelf right next to it, which I don't like. But
those are good problems to have.
Yes, they are. Yeah.
I mean, the TMNT stuff does have, I guess, key overall arcs where I think it's the 7th volume kind of like rounds off the first main section, and then the 12th volume ends the first writer's run, and then there's I forget, I think Sophie Campbell took over at that point for the 13th volume going forward. So there are like stopping points, if you like, within the TMT run.
Yeah, I think Sophie picks up at 14, if I remember right. I think I just got the original 101 issues or 105 issues before she jumped it, because that's when I kind of jumped off at that point.
Yeah, because she was part of it the whole time, but Eastman was like a co-writer type thing, I believe.
Yeah, well, I think I might have already covered my bit of why I picked it for this exercise is because when I saw it on the shelf or when, we were looking around at what it could be, I was just like, yeah, this seems like the other questions of, why haven't you returned to it in 5 years? Or how much has it been on your mind over the last 5 years? I thought those would be like the questions I just answered would be ones. And also I wanted to find out about the next things about like, is it what I remember it being? Was it, and the reason I picked it also had to do with obviously the time I'd read it, I had a sort of association with it because I would say, oh, this would be my parents in 20 years. In reality, it ended up being my parents in far, far less than 20 or 25 years. So I wanted to revisit it to say that, will this change the book for me? Because the last time I read it, it's like, oh, this is something I should prepare for, when they get to their 80s or mid 80s or something like that, but they both passed away in their early 70s. So, how does that change the book? How does that change my relationship with this work? And will I now look upon it less as a tourist who may one day visit, and as a person who's now been through this whole thing themselves and has it in their past? I thought that would be a sort of interesting study for me to do as a comparison, which is why I thought I would pick this and bring everyone down on a Saturday night instead of picking Why the Last Man and seeing whether that still stands up or not. Speaking of which, like, I remember the ending of Why the Last Man. I've forgotten a lot of stuff in the middle, but I remember what happens at the end, and I remember how it ends. So it's one of those things where I was like, let's see how much the book changes because of how much I've changed or how much I've been through. It was a good case study, I thought, for me to examine that.
Yeah, I mean, that was something that I thought about probably after choosing my book was like, do I choose a book that's maybe like more potentially dated and that might add something more to the conversation, like Ex Machina or something. But I was like, one, that's a very long run to read in a short period of time.
Yeah, that was one of the decisions, right? Like one volume as opposed to a whole series.
But also, I don't know. I think with somewhat politically driven or dated books, for me anyway, if I like it or don't like it, my opinion doesn't tend to change. So like if I enjoyed Why the Last Man the first time I read it, and then I read it again 5 years later, just on a like dated perspective, I don't think my personal opinion really changes, because I've always looked at a comic book as its own universe, and although it can comment on the real world, it's not in the real world in the real time for me. So if there's something, say for instance, there's like slavery in a book or something like that, and it's a standard in that book, it doesn't affect me as much thinking, oh, well, that's not something that's acceptable in the world today. I just think, well, that's how that world works, and I just read it as part of that story. So I'm a little bit different, I think, when it comes to some of those kind of things. I thought that it wouldn't have been something that, for me, would have brought up as many interesting things as maybe for somebody else when it comes to those kind of books.
Right. I think when I think about dated, I don't necessarily think about it from that point of view, because the world of the book, if it's capturing it accurately, it sort of becomes timeless, in many ways, because it may be about a specific period of time, but the storytelling is universal. I think what for me makes a work dated is this used to pass for humor in that time, like making fun of people's weight or making fun of people's race. The author is playing it for comedy, or the author says that the hero is cool because he slaps women, or something like that. It's just like, if it's about violence and if it's about misogyny, then this is an effective portrayal of it. It's not supposed to be admirable behavior, but if it's supposed to be admirable because that behavior was considered admirable at one point of time, that I think is where I have that hiccup. And even if I think about it as being produced at a different point of time, I can no longer recommend it. Whereas maybe when I was younger and I didn't know any better and I would read something, I'd be like, man, that's so funny. I'd go out and tell somebody, like, that's so funny, you've got to check it out. And today, if I read it, I'm like, no, I don't. First of all, I may be different. But the other thing is, is it the world of the story? Because that part of it, I completely agree with you. That's the story of the world. That's the way these characters are. That's the way these people are. But where I see the author's hand saying, this is what is considered cool, this is what is considered sexy, this is what is considered funny. And that is something that we no longer believe, culturally, or that is something that we find problematic today. That, I think, interferes with my reading. And that is, a good way to segue into our next question, which is, were you afraid of something when returning to this work, or what were you looking forward to? So, positive sense, what were you looking forward to when returning to it, and what were you afraid of maybe returning to it? And this is something, Highland, just to, before we jump into this question, connecting to what you just said, this is something that I considered as a parameter, because there are things that I have liked when I was younger that I'm afraid of revisiting, because I kind of want to hold on to my memory of them being good. And if I revisit it and I find that it is no longer good, or if I find that I was stupid or foolish for enjoying it, now I'll take that, like, it is one of those things, like George Lucas can't ruin my childhood by making new Star Wars movies, but I can ruin my own childhood by watching a movie that I loved when I was a kid, and then watching it again today and going, oh my God, this is awful. What the hell was I thinking? And suddenly my nostalgia and, oh, that summer I spent with my cousins is going to have a little bit of a, tinge on it. It's going to have a discoloration over there where it is, so sometimes I'm worried about revisiting things where I'm like, you know what? I guess that was good when it was back in the day, but I'm not. I don't want to take the chance and ruin my memories. But that's half joking. I think you should still revisit it and check your sensibilities, just to map your growth or your evolution as a reader. But yes,
Yeah.
the question in hand is not that. The question is, what were you looking forward to, or what were you afraid of in returning to Birthright?
So partly probably the same thing. It kind of fits into both a little bit. I mentioned earlier that there was a couple of characters that I didn't really connect with, and then also there was a bit of a gap in the middle of the book that I don't really remember that well. And I think those two things are both things that would make me look forward to a reread and have a little bit of a fear of the reread, because I want to re-experience those bits of the book that I don't remember, because that's something that I can re-experience or experience, afresh if I don't really remember it. But from the flip side of that, if there's a reason that I've decided to kind of, subconsciously forget that part of the story because I didn't like those characters or whatever else, and I maybe connect with them even worse than I did the first time round, then what then happens at that kind of stage? So that was probably the biggest thing, because there was just niggles of, and I guess there's that kind of balance where you've kind of hinted at a little bit there as well, where like there's the world of what's kind of going on, and if you think about it just as a world you're immersing yourself in, and everything that's happening in that world is that world and is being told by that world, then there's nothing that can really be dated. But as soon as you think of it as a creation by somebody and that they have something to say through this work, then especially with narration and things like that, that can kind of affect those, like perceptions on things. So when I'm rereading certain like worlds and stuff like that, like it's am I gonna connect with it as well? Am I gonna maybe find different ways to connect with these characters, or is it gonna be that I invest in 2 hardcovers, I get halfway through the first one, and I'm like, oh no, this is terrible.
The real fear.
And don't kind of push through the whole kind of thing. But at the same time, there's always that slight hope as well that, reading something a second time, you're going to pick up nuances that you maybe missed the first time round, and maybe I will connect with some of these characters better than I did the first time round, or I'll realize why I didn't connect with certain characters, from that kind of perspective. So yeah, for me, a bit of kind of like wanting to flesh things out again in my head and get to know the larger story, because like, as I said, I could remember the kind of start and the overall kind of morals, but I couldn't necessarily remember a lot of the kind of middle ground stuff. I wanted to enjoy the art again, because I really enjoyed the overall art throughout a book. Like I love when there's a book start to finish done by the same artist, like artist colorist team. And as someone who probably 50% of what I read is Marvel DC, which changes artists whenever they feel like it could be issue to issue. It's really nice to have something that's like consistent and quality consistent as well, on a high level. So I was looking forward to that. But yeah, there's always that slight worry that when I look back on something versus re-experiencing it, it's not going to be as good, because maybe things have changed, or the style of how I'm reading comics has changed. Like maybe I'm now used to like a faster paced story and it's a slower paced story, or kind of things like that. To use like a computer game analogy, like I might remember Ocarina of Time as being like the best Zelda game ever, but then I go and play it and like the analog stick is really like clunky and you can't aim in the right direction, and like all the things that I'm used to now and got almost complacent on. I wouldn't have been complacent when I experienced the first time round, because that would have been the norm. So there's just things that have changed, not necessarily in a bad way, but just through style changes and modernization of techniques and things like that also change how an old thing might be experienced versus a new thing. But yeah, a bit of a mixed bag. I think there wasn't anything standout that I was like, oh, I remember this bit being really bad, I want to avoid this, or this bit's going to be like overly emotional for me, I want to avoid that. It was more just, I kind of hope that I connect better with these characters that I don't feel I connected with the first time around.
Yeah, that's interesting. The question's interesting to me, the idea that I don't think there was anything I was afraid of. Like, and I was just kind of trying to reflect back on why. And part of it's just because of I think how much the series means to me. It's more of an endearing series to me. I was really looking forward to some of the comedy. And one of the notes I took was it was a lot funnier than I even remembered. So it kind of hit home on that. But I wasn't concerned with anything of like, it's not going to live up to its expectations. Like that never even crossed my mind with this one. Because I got such great taste that this is a second read of a book I've already liked. So, of course it's going to, be great. But I kind of wish I would have maybe picked a different book now where maybe some of that could have been, maybe I could have thought a little bit more about, is this going to hold up as well? But yeah, for me with Black Hammer, it's such an endearing title. It brings back such great memories that there was no kind of concern over it's not going to kind of live up to my expectations. I would have been shocked, I think, if I wouldn't have enjoyed it as much as I did. There were things that stood out that were better than I remembered. Dean Ornstrom's art is phenomenal, and especially now that I've got it in, on high quality paper in a huge oversized format versus the single issues from when I originally read it. That makes a big difference. But no, it's just as endearing, if not even more so, because it takes me back 10 years to when I had a few less scars, a few less emotional issues, maybe a little more mental capacity. So it takes me back
hold on. You're not answering our final question, are you? I mean, like we're still on the, what were you afraid of? What were you looking forward to?
Well, I can't remember what the questions are, so that's what I was trying to answer. But you gave me too much rope.
Yeah, well, you hung yourself now. No, I'm just joking. I wanted to give you the proper drum roll before you got to what you but this is, I think, one of those questions is like, for this category, you could pick something that you really enjoyed and you were interested in seeing if you enjoyed as much. If it still holds up. That is, the kind of way that Highland G also presented that. But I also briefly flirted with this idea of picking something that you didn't necessarily enjoy as much and see if you've changed your mind on it. Which would be rarer because, why would we have it on our shelves unless we just never get rid of anything, which, might be a category that I fall into. But that might have been one of those things, which is where Gore Vidal would have liked us to see talk about, trouble or something that was like I know that there were a couple of books that I might have picked that I remember not enjoying that are still on my shelves and I could have given them a shot. But then I was just like, so, I mean, but it definitely wasn't the case for either of you because you picked something that you knew you had loved, that you had enjoyed, and you were revisiting it, interestingly, in a more deluxe format than you originally read it. I mean, like you've not only, hoped that you will continue to like it, you've kind of given it that vote of confidence like when you upgrade to say no, I want this in oversized and I want this on good paper. Sorry, Blackpool, I was interrupting you.
No, not at all. I'll just finish with this because it's part of the reason I think I picked Black Hammer over the Lemire title was like it feels like there's more depth to Black Hammer than there is to going through 12 issues of Moon Knight, right? It feels like there's a little more emotional resonance for me than a little surface level superhero comic style. And so I didn't go quite as deep as what you did with talking about aging parents and death and stuff like that from the contemplative side. But I feel like this one was part of the reason I picked it was that it wasn't just at a punching and capes and kicking and fighting type book like the Lemire run for Moon Knight was. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, and I think my answer to this question would be I wasn't really what I was looking forward to was, as I said, I was looking forward. Like for me, maybe the looking forward and the afraid of were the same thing. It's just like because I wanted to see how I would read it or how I would be affected by it now, which was both a little bit of trepidation and a little bit of curiosity. It was both things in there, sort of mixed together. But I think it was fairly positive because I had such a positive view of this book, and I thought, in my memory of it, it was such a powerful book, and it was so. The whole idea is to talk about some things that people don't want to talk about, but it's not a preachy book. It's got nothing. Like it doesn't give you any because there'll be a lot of nonfiction books, that'll give you statistics that will tell you about hospice care, or it will tell you, and like even books like Trashed, which is a great book by Durf Backdurf about being a garbage collector. The 2 years that he spent after high school or something like that, being a garbage collector. And you'll have things about consumption and you'll have things, you'll have some data, you'll have some history. People will do that in nonfiction all the time. This book doesn't have anything. It's pure autobiography. It's pure this experience, my mother, my father, the way they talk, the way they behave with each other, her temper, his sweetness, his mental illness, her, personality. So it's got nothing to do with like this is Medicare in the US or something like that. There are a couple of little comments that, this social security or this insurance that they have, they lived in Brooklyn all their lives, but then she moves them to Connecticut, which is where she lives after they get to a certain age. And this, insurance that they've paid into for 70 years doesn't cover them in Connecticut. So there's like a little bit of commentary about that, but it isn't about politics, or it's not about economics, or it doesn't give you that kind of, it's very, very intimate. So I think my thing was that, will I be, will I be as transported? Will I find it as relatable as I did? Because again, as I said, when I first read it, it's somewhere in America. It's, a 40-year-old woman or almost 50-year-old woman dealing with 90-year-old parents. It's very removed from me. It's very removed from my life and my circumstances and my thing. And even if I've gone through this experience, it's still not the same. So, how much will I relate to it was a question I had, but it was a curiosity question. I wanted to take a look which is why, which is the thing I was looking forward to. I was like saying, how much have I changed in the interim? Not so much how much the work will change, obviously, but that's part of the same thing for me. That it's part and parcel of the same thing. That reasoning. But that brings us to our final question of the evening. The main event, so to speak, all of this has been preamble to this, is now that we have revisited 5 or more years later a work that we have picked and not picked and thought about or not thought about in these ways, what did we think of it? What was our experience of it now in this revisited thing? Haranji, you want to take us into the last question?
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot to unpack in one question, but
Yeah, well, that's the next 4 hours.
I mean, like, initial impressions going back into the kind of book was all kind of positive for me, really. The first arc was pretty much exactly what I kind of expected, so it kind of felt more kind of like nostalgic in a way, kind of going back, retreading over old ground. What was quite nice reading through it is that I had a little bit of a split between things that I'd forgot and were sort of rediscovering as a fresh kind of experience, which kept the overall read itself fresh, and certain things that I would remember as I was going through it. So like I might get, like 5 or 6 issues in, and then I'd be like, oh, I remember what happens like at the end of this arc, like or whatever it is. And that was quite nice as well. Because you're kind of building this relationship a little bit more between like, your memories of the time and also, what kind of happened in the kind of book itself. So yeah, so going in from that perspective, I did make some notes, but I also don't want to give like spoilers too much to the story side of things. I would note that like a few things that maybe I didn't remember quite as much is there was some things done with the art which I found quite interesting on the reread, where I'd kind of pictured it almost a complete split between the tone and coloring and things of the kind of crime element of the story, and the kind of fantastical part being very kind of like high contrast, bright, kind of art from that perspective. But I noticed there was other nuances in there that maybe I didn't pay attention to the first time round. So without going heavy into kind of like later on kind of spoilers, the main start of the book, as I said, is the boy going missing and somewhat the dad being blamed for it. And you notice as he's kind of spiraling down and starts drinking and, potentially loses his job or whatever, that the color of those panels is getting darker and tones and things are actually kind of matching what's happening to him sort of internally. And I thought that was quite interesting that those things kind of happened in that way. And then there was also some sort of, I guess, kind of bleed over between the two kind of worlds. So if like people visit from one world to the other, like the colors and the art styles can kind of jump between the two, even down to like language being used, like characters that had been from one world maybe like spoke slightly differently than the ones that were from Earth. They had a more maybe like classical written Arthurian kind of like, legend type things. So it wasn't quite like dramatic, theater, but there would be things like, I can't think of it, like why are your soldiers attacking such and such or something like that, and they're talking about policemen, and like things like that. So like the terminologies that different people would use was constantly kind of like reminding you of like who they were, where they came from, what their kind of upbringings and things kind of were. There were a couple of times, and I'm probably quite picky with books now. I think that there's a lot of like little niggles that I'll notice on things that I'll let go, but I wouldn't have maybe noticed previously. So if somebody say sets something up with a certain, you know, object, say for instance, this object will open this door or something like that, and then later on in the story, the door gets opened and they use a different object or something like that. Like something like something like that can like throw me off in the moment, and I'm like,
Well, you're
wait,
just
but it
a
was
much more
supposed to be,
discerning reader now. That means, you know.
you know.
Yeah, if you're like, I need these things to line up properly. What? I'm not a kid.
There's also, when you're reading like singles versus reading things in a trade, the way that singles are typically written, if written well, is that they end on a somewhat cliffhanger and they start with a somewhat recap. So there's that slight stutter in the story as you're reading through it, where it's like recapping things as you're going from one issue to the next.
You're like I just read this.
Yeah.
No,
You just showed me a different view of the same scene. Yeah.
Right.
So there's a few things like that. And probably the one thing that overall I think might have been a little bit better now looking at it from a second read is the whole idea of him being the hero, forced or otherwise, could have been something that they maybe held back a little later in the story. Kind of like if you're reading Invincible, for instance, and they have the kind of like home drama for a bit, and then all of a sudden a big moment kind of happens and it brings you into the superhero kind of elements. I almost wish there was a little bit longer before they were like, right, we're going on this kind of hero's journey as a I guess an overall. I noticed a lot of smaller referential stuff that I didn't really pay attention to the first time round. There's characters that looked like straight homages to things like Constantine and stuff like that in the story, where I'm like, I wouldn't have maybe paid attention to those things the first time round. Stuff like along those kind of lines. They mentioned Conan a lot as a pun when people are speaking to Mikey, when they see him as the older, bigger kind of guy. They're just like, "Hey, Conan, go do this," you know, like just as a kind of like almost like a satirical, you know, poke at him. Not being a big Conan reader, the reference doesn't really work that well for me. I mean, I get it, but like I was just like, you don't need to see Conan 20 times. Like I get it, but apart from like smaller niggles and stuff like that, I felt it flowed really, really quickly. Like it's a really somewhat fast-paced overall read. Each sort of trade's worth of arc had a nice kind of like build up and reveal by the end of the kind of arc. So you always kind of like were left with something that you wanted to learn more about going into the next kind of arc, which is really nice. The main middle part of the story I enjoyed a lot more. It was a bit of a kind of like brothers road trip in a way, where they're trying to fulfill Mikey's mission, but at the same time Mikey's trying to like convince his brother and his dad to kind of be on his side and things like that. And I think I enjoyed that a lot more this time round than the first time round. There's just something niggling in the back of my head that I felt that the brother was like a pushed in character the first time round, and that he wasn't like as integral to the story. But reading it for a second time, I almost feel like they were the duo stars of the story. Like they were the team going to the end goal, and I don't know why I would have not connected with them as much the first time round.
Interesting.
So that was a nice kind of change. I still am not a huge fan of the girlfriend character, but I don't think it's because of any like personality things. I feel like in the amount of different characters going on and a lot of different story points being hit, she just doesn't get as much as a run up to things happening. So you're getting like flashbacks of them telling the story of what happened in the fantastical world. You're not necessarily seeing it in real time, and because of that, you're not necessarily getting the full arc of some of the maybe like secondary or tertiary kind of characters. And I found that the the girlfriend character kind of went too quickly from being this is a young girl I'm training with and is part of, you know, the people that I'm kind of with, to, oh, she's my girlfriend, to, you know, oh, you know, we're together, and other things kind of happen down the line. And I just felt like there could have been a little bit more setup to those things. And that's maybe why I didn't feel her character beats as much as I did a lot of the other characters.
And is that something you remember feeling the first time you read it as well, or is this something new that you're observing?
No,
and
so
absorbing now.
From looking back, all I could remember is that I didn't really connect with her character, and I don't
Right.
really
But
remember.
now you've
Didn't
got
remember
more
why.
of a reason why.
But now I've got more of the why. Yeah.
See,
And it
this is
doesn't.
exactly what we were talking about last time, is that the first time you read it, you're sort of galloping through things. Sometimes you might be focusing on plot. Sometimes you just want to know what happens next, etc. And it's the reread that gives you the texture, even if it isn't about the story and it's about your own feelings about it. It's great to hear, you know, it's like it gives you a better articulation of why you feel a certain way rather than to be purely sensory. That there's an intellectual, analytical dimension to it from what you're saying. You're kind of proving that as well. That's great.
Yeah. So I think I've, in a way, like I didn't get anything completely new from the story, but I relearned some of the beats of the story, and I learned why I had the feelings and reactions to different parts of the story, you know, from my first kind of read a little bit more. And I really enjoyed it. The art overall is great. There's a few moments that here and there are a little bit iffy, but I think every artist has a panel occasionally that doesn't quite work out. You know, it's just one of those things. But yeah, overall, it looks great. There's some really nice, like, 2-page spreads and stuff. I'm going to see if I can maybe find one while we're kind of going through this. That's the guy that looks like Constantine, by the way, like blatantly like Constantine. This guy.
Yeah.
And yeah, so there's like big sort of like action pages a lot of time where they'll use like one full page or split things kind of up for that kind of side of stuff. Or there's even like interesting stuff like this where it's like a 2-page spread, but there's still like panels underneath it. So there's like a fantastical kind of battle going on, but then there's like explanation of what's kind of happening with the other characters at the same kind of time. Try to find one of these spreads if I can. Every time I look for them now, they're all these ones that have the ones across the bottom. But it's there we go. There's a big one. But yes, there's lots of kind of like magical stuff. There's lots of like bright color and things like that. But it still feels somewhat grounded. Like it doesn't feel overly cartoony. And as I kind of mentioned kind of before, like it's not a book that is like, you know, I'm a hero, I was always a hero, this is my you know, villain who's attacked me because he's a bad guy and I have to take him out and that's the end of the story kind of type thing. Like it's more, interestingly, the bad guy already existed and the hero was almost forced onto his journey. And then, as I said, like the decisions being made along the way really depend on which characters making them and what their backgrounds are. So for the characters that were really well fleshed out, I really enjoyed. I enjoyed the little hints of like certain characters that might like backstab little other characters or do things, like you're noticing the lead up of those kind of things. But as I said, it also made me notice the characters that didn't have as much lead up for the kind of overall goals. But yeah, I mean, to be honest, overall, really enjoyable. And you know, this is only the first half of the run, and if I had the second book, I would start straight away. Like that's the positive review. So like
that's great.
You know, really enjoyed the overall reread.
Very cool. Matthew, what about you? How did you find your reread of Black Hammer?
Yeah. And I'm gonna put a quick plug in here because I think the questions that you came up with are ones that we should apply to next month, because we're going to start a reread of Strangers in Paradise with some
It's a
other guests.
reread for some, and for some, it's
For
a
some.
first-time read.
Yeah. But for those of us who have reread it or who have read it before, just this, some of these questions, I think this is like the timing's great. I mentioned how like we had this last time we were talking about rereads. This builds on that, and then for me, because I've read Strangers in Paradise, this Strangers in Paradise just flows right into it, like keeping these questions in mind. I think it was. I don't know if this was planned by you. If it was, you're a genius. Well, you're a genius either way, but this even knocks you up a little bit more. No, it's like perfect. These questions are like, oh, I'm going to go into Strangers with a little background on like, oh, I can approach this a little bit more analytically in a different way. So I thank you for that. As far as Black Hammer goes, yeah, it was funnier than what I thought. It was more endearing to a certain extent. Like I forgot how emotional some of the parts were in there. You know, Gale, the golden Gale is trapped in a 9-year-old body, is in love with Barb Alien, who's a homosexual in love with the priest. And so she's got this longing, and she actually at one point in the opening tries to end her own life. Like she doesn't want to live anymore. She's going to be stuck on this farm. There's a lot of emotional and deeper things that I remember. And as Highland G was talking about some of like the kind of looking for some of the consistency of some of the stuff in the art, like, oh, does this really work? Is it one of the things I think is interesting with Black Hammer is the art is so focused on the characters and less with the background. So there's less like picking through stuff to try to like, oh, does this really connect? Does this really flow and work logically? And I don't think I would have picked that up without this discussion. The art's gorgeous. I love what Dean Ornstein does with it. As far as like the overall for me though, yeah, it's a complete winner. I've always connected with Lemire's stuff. And this one seems to be right on par. I found it was even, like I said, more emotionally, more connecting, more of like just my heart kind of opening up to these characters and like taking in what Lemire is trying to express through his writing. It reminded me of all the stuff that I liked about it. There was nothing that I would look back and was like, oh, that was a negative. Or I didn't like that part of it. I did forget about how the mystery unfolded, which was really interesting. Like the people that actually tried to keep sabotaging the superheroes that are caught on the farm. I forgot like how that all unfolded. And so it was like discovering a new story almost in one that I already knew. Yeah, it's definitely one I'll return to. I'm going to keep going on with it now, try to get through the rest of the volumes. And I hope the rest of the volumes hold up as well as the first one do.
Yeah. And I'm glad that that's what you're talking about because, you've avoided all spoilers for me. So maybe the 1.5 ones that I haven't yet gotten to will like you're kind of inspiring me to check that out. But there's so many things on the shelves, as we were saying.
As long as you don't do what Gore threatened to send me a bill for it, like if he got into Black Hammer.
Right.
So as long as I don't get a bill from you as
this.
well.
I'll have to find it somewhere.
Okay. So Gore, you can send your bill to For the Love of Comics and we'll get it. Hopefully his lawyers are international.
But yes, we do want to plug our upcoming in February 6. I think there's going to be 6 people on that one particular thing. We're going to have 3 experts joining us, and we're going to be talking about Strangers in Paradise, which we have huge fans of over here, and we've got a couple of people who've been meaning to get to it, probably bought a couple of box set looking kind of things. I'm not going to point any fingers because I'd be pointing at myself and haven't gotten to it yet. But this is just a perfect opportunity for us to have a big fat panel discussion. In fact, it will be a multi-episode discussion. So for all of you who watch this Comics Jam, either in the live or in the recorded, keep your eye out for that in February. That's going to be an Avengers type event.
And if you want to, I think it's like the 21st is what we're looking at for a date of February. And if you
The
want
21st
to,
of February.
yeah, we're going to divide it out. Stranger Paradise, I think, is 109 issues total. So we're going to do the first 35 if people want to read along or if they want to refresh themselves or go back through it. So we're going to try to do 1 through 35 for this first go. And then, like you said, have a couple of different sessions. Another one 6 or 8 weeks out after that.
Yeah, that's a great point. Though, if you in the audience have not read or have not reread Strangers in Paradise for a very long time, issues 1 through 35 start now and then join in the conversation on the 21st of February. Excellent. All right. And I think, so then I'm the only person who has not answered the last question and what did I think of it now. And I think in some ways I have sort of answered it in I found it to be as moving and as heartbreaking and as grim and as funny as I remember it being. I had forgotten a lot of the details. I'd forgotten a lot of the details that have to do with the family. I had forgotten a lot of the details of the nature of the parents before they became frail and old and sick. So in this, there is towards the second half, there is a little bit more about Ross Chath's relationship with her parents. It's there throughout, but the past relationship and the fact that she and her father got along well, in spite of her father having a number of nervous issues, like he couldn't change a light bulb, he couldn't do anything on the stove. He was absolutely, useless at most things in some ways, even though he'd fought in the Second World War. And, then there are things that when I was reading this, one of the things I was worried about is how much I would be affected by it. But what I didn't realize is that this time around, every single thing I made a comparison to myself. And it was like, it wasn't like, oh, I recognize this. It's just like, oh, that doesn't apply to me. That is not the way it was with me and my parents. That is not, it was just like every single thing. And it was just like, it was ridiculous because, I mean, I knew there would be some shadow of that. I didn't realize it would permeate every single page and every single panel, which was the most unusual, and I'm very happy that I can share this with all of you, is because it's probably one of the most unusual comics reading experiences of my life in which I've tried to put myself, purposefully or unconsciously into every single bit, even in recognizing how that's not at all similar to my life. And it's never happened to me that much before. And it definitely wasn't the case when I first read it. But I found myself going, nope. Oh, I recognize that. Oh, nope. It was just like, it was almost like a checklist. So it was one of the most weird things. One of the things that I had sort of forgotten is how much text there is in this book. And by that, I mean, it's got stuff like this, where it almost becomes like a prose book for a couple of pages. And I am usually, and you've got stuff like this. So you have black and white comics and you have little strip comics and gag comics. Most of it is, the way that we would, the way we would think of. But there are also things like her mother would write poems. So there's this there's this typescript kind of thing of the poem being written over there. And then comics, some of them are longer, some of them are gag pages. But what I had forgotten about was exactly how much text there is and how much prose there is. And that is something in general I don't like in my comics. I mean, like, when I see like a big block of prose, it's almost like my eyes glaze over and I want to turn. And even with stuff like Watchmen, the first time I read Watchmen, I didn't read any of the stuff at the end of it. I was just like, no, I just want to read the comics. It was the second Watchmen read that I was reading all of that stuff. And there's a lot in which I've had to kind of steel myself and go like, okay, fine, I'll read this prose. But I've never quite enjoyed a whole block of text within my comics. I like my comics to be comics in some ways. But in here, I think it's because the lettering of the prose is exactly the same or more or less the same as the lettering of the comics. And that creates a sort of bridge, and it creates a sort of familiarity in which it's not quite as jagged, but it's very similar to the lettering in the word balloons. And so that means that this word balloon and this piece of prose have the same audio in my ear, and therefore it's not as disruptive. So this is one of those very few comics that have large blocks of text in it that I read, and then I did, while rereading, I did say, maybe I'll just skip this text and I'll just read the next comic section of it. But it was impossible to do because it's so integrated into that. So I found that to be quite an unusual thing, that I did enjoy reading the text, and I did understand, when is she choosing to put it into comics and when is she just saying things. She didn't want to illustrate every single thing. And the way that she illustrated the scenes and the way that she illustrated the dialogue, to me worked very well. But yes, at the end of this, I found myself extremely moved. I found myself extremely, shaken, but in a very good way. Once again, but this trip through this book was very different from my earlier one. It was almost like it was a different book, which is unusual because it was the same book. And I think that's the reason. Like, I felt that, I made an interesting choice because I picked it to see whether it would be different because of my experiences being different. And boy, was it, it was just like, it was completely different. And that I thought was kind of, even in this advanced years, gave me a new experience that I haven't had before.
Do you think that experience of like you going, nope, not my experience, not my experience, not my experience. Do you think that would have been as heavy if you weren't doing it as kind of like a reread for this stream to be more analytical about it? Or do you think it would have still been that way no matter if you were thinking, as kind of homework?
I think as someone on this stream said, I'm a genius, so I just approach everything with that level of it. No, I think I wasn't. I think when I reread stuff, I generally am automatically more analytical than I was my first reading. I think in this case, it was exacerbated by the fact that I could recognize so many things that I would automatically start thinking, oh, this is my story. And then I would be like, whoa, that's not at all my story. And that has nothing to, so it was that sort of, like, I think the first time I read it, it was that tourism. It was that empathy kind of thing. And over here, it was like a reverse empathy, or like an empathy for myself or something like that. It was like a weird turnaround of that first experience, where this was focused more inward. But I do think that it was because from the very beginning, I was thinking about it as from the point of view of my parents. So I think because when I first read it, I didn't think about me and my parents until much later in the story. Like, then I was thinking like, oh, this is as I was saying, like, oh, if it's about 90-year-old parents, even if I was to think, it's like, oh, that's 30 years away, or something like that. That's 25 years away. That's the way I would have maybe thought about it the first time. But over here, because it's in the past, I think I was applying it to myself less for analysis and more from that proximity sort of having been evaporated, But I highly recommend this book. I know there are, and I'm also the same way, that sometimes people don't want to read heavy stuff, or they don't want to read, sad or depressing stuff, etc. I think this is, like, it's heavy in some ways, but it's also very honest, and that humor is part of that honesty. And then she's also very critical of herself, where she always feels like, oh, I brought them back from the hospital, I deposit them at home, and then I'm going home. She's like, I'm going, and she's like, I'm the worst person in the world.
Yeah.
Like, why am I going home? Why aren't I staying over here? Why am I, it's just like, no, but I need to get home. I've just, I've been through, so it's that kind of thing, that kind of honesty that makes it feel like nobody's lecturing you. Nobody's trying to teach you a lesson. They're just kind of giving you an insight into this very, difficult experience. And that difficult experience taking as much time as it does, a lot of this is about like how slow some things are. Just like sometimes you're wondering, like, how much longer is this going to last? And then you feel guilty about wondering how long it's going to last. So that complexity, I think I appreciated that complexity a lot more this time. It's the same kind of thing. It's like some people have told me that, before I was a parent, this comic meant X to me. And after I became a parent, it became very different to me, because then you've gone through that experience, So, I mean, different people will have that kind of thing. But irrespective, I mean, just as a closing thing, I would say that I would highly recommend Can't We Talk About Something More Pleasant. This is like one of the best comics I've read in some ways. It's like it'll if I make a list of top 10 autobiographical comics, my top 10, sort of thing, this is definitely going to be in that top 10 autobiographical comics. It's the kind of thing that makes you understand that autobiography isn't just navel gazing and it isn't just therapy. I mean, of course, those things are important. I think navel gazing is a worthwhile pastime, but there's so much more to it as a generosity to a reader rather than it being about, she's talking about her own life, she's talking about her experience, but she's giving to the reader a view of her life so openly and honestly that I think it's a book that everyone should at least give a shot. I mean, there's not such thing as a book that's for everyone, and it won't be for everyone, I think. But I think you should give it a shot, and then you can decide that, nah, it's not for me. But, I think it's definitely worth giving a shot.
I think, from my experience, whether it's conversations or movies or books like this, part of what it sounds like where it would resonate with me is the deep truths that come from the vulnerability of the creator to say, yeah, a lot of people would have shame over and wouldn't want to tell people that they were, waiting for their parent to die or that they were guilty about doing X, Y, and Z because they, that outward facade we want to put on. We don't want to admit to some of these things that go on in our side of our head. And when somebody says, this is natural, this is normal to have some of these, and I'm going to be vulnerable enough to share that connects on a level that can be pretty deep. And It sounds like that's part of what it was. This sounds wonderful. It sounds like a really good, something I'm going to try to dig up.
Yeah. And I think, you bring up a good point because I was trying to think of an example and I get it now is that, for example, there's a part in here where she briefly thinks about like how much money this is costing.
Yeah.
And then it's her parents' savings, but their savings are just like dwindling and dwindling and dwindling. And then she has this thought like, oh, there's going to be less left for me. And then she's ashamed of having that thought, and then she's just like, oh, what a bad daughter I am, and all of that stuff. And then she's got to tell her parents that they're running, she's got to tell her mom that they're running out of money, etc., etc. And like, for example, when I was like, this comparison, for me, it was nothing like that. For me, it was just like, it doesn't matter how much money you have in the bank, it's not helping, And I was just like, take it all, take all the money and make them better. And it's useless. So it was the absolute opposite. But I could understand what she was talking about, Like I never had any such thought. I never had any such idea. In fact, for me, it was the absolute opposite idea, is that it's happening too fast. If I could throw more money at it and delay it, it would be better, or something like that. But you can understand the truth of what she's saying, of what she's feeling about that, along with the slight guilt of it and the kind of the pressure of money, and how much this is happening. So it's that kind of thing that I think about is like, it's maybe the first time I read it, it would just be like, oh my God, this money pressure, etc. But this time when I read it, it's like, man, I didn't have any money pressure, like that's the
Yeah.
way I was looking at it. It was like some people have it even worse is maybe the best that I could do with my reading of it. But I was constantly comparing it to myself to the point where I had to take that extra step to say, all right, you've got an additional thing, which is completely different from me.
Yeah, it's great because I love hearing about like what resonated, what she said. Um, it just fits in with a lot of what I do. Like I volunteer in the prisons doing mindfulness stuff, and we often talk about like I didn't decide to think that, oh, there's not going to be enough left for me, or this is dwindling down. That's not what I didn't, but my mind thought that, and then I take it personally and think that that's my thought and that's who I am. And then there's that shame or guilt that grows up around it. And so she's kind of normalizing all that. And for me, anyways, just points this idea of like, yeah, those thoughts are going to come up. They're not who we are. They're just thoughts. I didn't invite that thought to come up. It came up. And when I struggle with life is when I think that that's who I am. So I can hear some of that in this. I'm really interested, like I said, to dive into this book and take a peek at it, especially having a aging parent as well.
Yeah. I think it's, and as I said, it's not like a lesson or it's not like, how to or anything like that. It's just a little window into thing. And I think this is one of the things that we love about comics is that, look, I love all kinds of comics, but one of the things is that the medium can tap into us kind of like music in some ways. Like it could just like it be visceral because in comics, you as a reader are a co-author, right? You're writing what's between the panels, you're writing the movement, you're writing the kind of thing. So it has this unique ability to create empathy when you write autobiography. I think that's so that's what I like. I know a lot of people, including our friend Sleepy Reader, for example, who says that, I'm not really a fan of comics, autobiographies, etc. And I get what he's saying because he's reacting to a certain genre of autobiography. But I think because the reader, that's what makes science fiction and comics so great. That's what makes fantasy and comics so great. And that's what makes superhero comics so great. It really gives you that feeling of being in Spider-Man's shoes, because you are kind of drawing what's between the panels. So that level of participation, instead of it being a passive thing like a movie that just washes over you, that you're actively participating in it and you're actually an actor in this or you're part of the creation of this. I think that's the kind of stuff that gives all genres their power, but particularly this kind of autobiography. It kind of really does put you in people's skins and shoes in a very effective way if done properly. And I think, this is one of the best examples of doing that properly that I've encountered.
That's great.
So did you feel overall that it was a better experience before you could relate to parts of it or after you could relate to parts of it?
Oh, man. Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think there were different experiences. What I would say is, I think it's a masterpiece of a book because it could summon two such different experiences without changing a single word or a single panel, which I think we talked about in our rereading session. A lot of comics can do. They can change over time. The comic itself hasn't changed, but it has the density or it has the complexity to kind of give you two or three different feelings, completely different feelings, and that's why when we talk about Day Tripper, it comes up, or even rereading Mouse, when you see his father and his relationship, you read Mouse at a younger age, and you read Mouse at an age where you have a different relationship with your parents. Those are the kind of things that people talk about. If you have kids, you read this parent story in a very different way once you have kids. If you've been to war, you read that war story very differently once you've been to war. It's that kind of stuff that I think all literature does, is like it changes with you as you grow older or as you have different experiences. The literature changes. It changes the way it resonates within you. So that's where I think, everyone, anyway, not to get too much on a soapbox, but the reason why I'm okay with
Yes.
reading No, the reason why I'm okay with reading dense things and things that I think are worthwhile instead of it being pure entertainment, I have no problem with entertainment at
Yeah.
all. What I have problem with is one-dimensional things, things that are only one note, and it's kind of like gum that you chew for 5 minutes and then you've gotten all the flavor that you can out of it, and there's nothing else to get from it. And the reason why I gravitate towards certain kinds of works, or I stick with certain kinds of works, is because I love coming back to them and getting a completely different experience. I love it when they're rich enough and complex enough to give you more. And I'm a big fan of nostalgia, so I have no worry. I've got no issues, but I don't like nostalgia to be deified to such an extent that I'm always chasing that high that I had before. And I'm always going to fall a little short of that because I've got this idealized sense of the past. I'd much rather have something that has gotten better with age, or that's become different with age, or is giving me something that it never gave me before. I find that much more satisfying than trying to crawl back into how innocent I was as a child and this He-Man comic was so great and I want to capture that again, etc. But that's what I like about really good works that make you feel like a child again without treating you like a child. I think there's two different things. I think there are certain works that are juvenile because they treat you as if you're a child. And then there are certain works that are beautiful because they make you feel like a child. But they make you feel like a child by doing a lot more complex stuff than the stuff that you read when you were a child. So that part of it, I think, is what I like about rereading. When I reread, then I get to decide, oh, this is actually a masterpiece. Or you know what? That first chew, that gave me all the flavor there was to get out of it. There is no more to get out of it. I think Nick Hornby says this about songs as well. He says every song has a certain number of plays in it. And then after you've gotten everything you can out of it, it just becomes familiarity. You're not getting anything new out of it. You're just reveling in the familiar. But really good songs have many plays in them, and other songs have a handful of plays before you get to that plateau. I mean, I'm paraphrasing wildly, but it's similar to that, I think.
That's an interesting comparison because I probably, just thinking out loud, I probably want songs to be the other way. Like I personally don't really enjoy the experience of trying to figure out if I like a song or connect with a song. I actually like listening to songs that I know inside out and can just kind of become background noise and like I know what they are, but like, they're not like something I'm actively having to listen to, like reading a book. Whereas like reading something, as we've all kind of mentioned a little bit, like there's different things that we might focus on that first read. And even from that perspective, a second or third read, you're going to pick up different things. And like, I enjoy that from a book perspective. I enjoy that even from like a movie perspective. Like I'll watch the movie for like the main story the first time, and the second time around I'll maybe be picking up like the secondary characters and side plot moments and little hidden Easter eggs and and kind of stuff like that. But I would never personally treat a song like that. Like I'm not looking for Easter eggs in a song. I'm not looking for like discrepancies in a song. It's just an interesting thought that came to my head.
Yeah, I mean, and again, we've talked about this before because different people treat music differently. That's just the analogy really that I'm thinking about of the number of plays. But yeah, because even in high fidelity, because I just want something I can ignore. I feel like that's what I'm looking for. Some background music that is just But then we make fun of that, the elevator music, the muzak, and all of that stuff. It's just like if you use it as a decoration or if you use it as an accessory, that's one thing. But if you're treating it like art, art is art. Art is like something that has been crafted. So I think that's where people sometimes get into all of this, like this pop music, and it doesn't have too much dimension to it, but it only has memorability and it has catchy stuff. But this classical music, on the other hand, it's got movements and texture and opera and blah blah blah, etc. So I don't know enough music to be able to comment on that, but sometimes I do feel that is the way with literature. That is the way with writing. That is the way with prose and with comics. There are things that are one dimensional, and it doesn't mean that they can't be entertaining and that they can't be, but you're not going to be able to revisit them and be rewarded each time. You're going to revisit them in order to just recapture. And I believe you're never going to recapture the highs of just that pure entertainment. It's just like the first time you ever saw Star Wars or the first time you ever, watched The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. But when it's really good and you watch it again, like The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, or Star Wars maybe, but it rewards you. It rewards you again and again and again because that density is there, and whether you recognized it by pinpointing it or not, you kind of knew it was there. Like, that's what I think about art, is like, even if you didn't know every Easter egg, and even if you didn't think you noticed every single thing, the guys who put it together, the cinematographers and the editors and the production designers, they did such a job, like that I can return to, I don't know, like the Fellowship of the Ring or something. I can return to it a number of times and I can get more from it, but it's always been there. The swords have always looked so cool, and the armor has always looked so good, and the sound design has always been that good. So you kind of respond to that, whether or not you can identify it, whether or not you can analyze it, you respond to it. And I think that's the way writers and musicians and artists work. They're like, you don't need to know the theory, but you will feel the effects because I know how to manipulate the theory. I know the theory well enough to get you to understand this without you knowing the theory. And that's what I really like.
I've skipped some podcasts by authors who are talking about the craft of writing because I was worried about peeking behind the curtains.
Yeah, you don't want to see the sausage being made.
Yeah, I didn't want to take away from the enjoyment of how they can evoke some of, like, when my heart leaps out or I get fearful or whatever it is. I don't want to know how they're doing it sometimes. I'm okay trying to diagnose it when I'm reading the craft of it, but I don't want to hear how they can come out and in like 3 sentences tell me, well, I just pulled this string by doing X, Y, and Z, and then being like, well, I'm never going to enjoy a book like that's going to evoke that again.
Is that real? Is that true?
I've avoided those podcasts. I won't even, some of my favorite authors, I won't listen to when they're talking about their craft because I don't want to know how they invoke those things. I want to be, it's magical when I read a book and my heart is moved and I'm falling in love with the character who's just a bunch of words written on the thing, and my mind puts it together. And maybe it's part of that, like, keeping that nostalgia alive to a certain sense. Like I want the feelings. I don't want to know exactly how I get them. Right.
Interesting, because I think, like, maybe it's different if you want to be a writer yourself.
Yeah, completely. I have no interest in that. I want to be taken away in the stories.
Right. So with the pretensions of being a writer, like, to me, it's like, no. I want to me, when I read someone like, I don't know, Nabokov or Coetzee, like, there are times when I'm like reading the sentences and I can't edit it any better. I can't do anything with it. That's when I know, like, this is, like, in my opinion, this is a master. Just like, there's nothing I would change about this. There's nothing I would want different. There's no way to do it, even if I want to. The sentences are perfect, and that level of perfection comes from craft. It doesn't. It's English. It's all these words are in the dictionary. So putting them together in this way, putting the colors in this way, putting the art together in this way, to me, it doesn't, to me, ruin it. I think when people talk wishy-washily about it and they try to make it very mystical, that's when I get bored. When people talk about craft and when they talk about the process of doing something, it just makes it even more impressive to me. It's like watching those extras of the Lord of the Rings DVDs. It made me appreciate the movie more. Like, now that I know that each of these whatever ring mail things was, sort of looped around each other and made of styrofoam, it doesn't mean that the next time I watch the movie, I'm saying, oh, they're all dressed in styrofoam. I'm just like, that's how they got the density. That's how they make it look so liquid, like they didn't just do this, they actually looped it through. It's like, so to me, the sentences and the writing and all of that stuff, to me, it works that way. And I think to a certain extent today, I think it's cool because with generative AI, I think it's showing a lot of the fault lines of people not understanding what art is, not understanding that art is so much about the process and so much about the intention of what someone wanted, not just the final product. So it almost feels like it's become a time where I want behind the scenes and I want process pages and I want sketches and I want character sketches at the end of the comic, because I want everyone to know that this is blood, sweat, and tears that makes these things happen. It's not just what's on the final page that's important, but it's about the process you went through. And, your intentionality is what makes it art, not the product, but the process. But so much for not getting on the soapbox.
That's why I was cheering when you were talking about getting on the soapbox. I was like, yes, finally we get this soapbox. No, it's funny because my not wanting to peek behind the curtain, it also resonates with the idea that like when somebody recommends a book to me, or I find a new book that's getting a lot of talk about, I'll never read a blurb. If there's a TV show or a movie I want to see, I immediately change the channel if it comes on. I want to uncover it all for myself and see how it resonates. So, like you said, I don't want to know how the sausage makes. I just want to taste it. I want to immerse myself. And that's
I'm really talking about like once you've watched the movie, I would never watch the process or the behind the scenes or the making of stuff beforehand, and I really don't agree with that thing saying this is great because they spent $1 million on it or because 200 people were. That's not what makes it great. Once I've decided it's great, then I'm interested in how it was made. And
in my example, I'm worried about the authors giving me some of these universal truths on how they craft that are like that are taught, and I don't want to know that because I don't want to start looking for those in my books as much as it is.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a balance there for me. Like I probably land somewhere in the middle where I think there's certain things that would really intrigue me after seeing it in a book or in a movie, and I'd want to know. Like, for instance, if someone like draws capes amazingly well or something, and then they've got a section in the back of the book about how they draw capes to make them look really cool, like that would really be interesting to me. Like I'd be like, I want to kind of figure that out. But I kind of agree a little bit with Blackpool in the sense that like if they were to say like, if I put these 3 story beats in, you're always going to cry on page 4, then I'm like, well, I don't necessarily want to know that. Like, but then also I don't think every writer is conscious of those things on the same level as other writers. Like some of them are probably with comic books more than with prose. They are, because you have to intentionally choose the turn of the page and where the art lines up and kind of things like that. But yeah, I don't know. Like there'd be some things I'd be interested to learn about, and some things I'd probably want to step back from. But then I also think there might be somewhat I try to think how to put it. Like there might be somewhat intentional themes that the writer had in their mind when they went to write the book, which creates moments for certain readers that they never outright put there as a moment for everybody to have, if you like. So you're not going to miss out on those by them explaining their theory, because those are very personal. But like absolute big story beats in something, like if they told me, I don't know, how they got me to get really emotional at the end of Cool Runnings or something, like I'd be like, I don't want to know that. Like,
well, I think some of those things are just like, like if people say this is the formula, this is a surefire guaranteed way to do it as a how-to, that kind of stuff I think is very different, because that's someone trying to sell you a course, know. Whereas if someone says how they did it and what was in their mind when they did that, that's not quite
this
the same
particular
thing.
Story or something.
Yeah, exactly. Because they're just like, oh, once I was walking down the river and I saw this, and it really took me to this idea. And then when I was in the museum, I saw this painting, and that's a very peculiar individual thing. And your peek behind the scenes is in the way that person's brain worked in order to come up with this. That doesn't mean anyone else can replicate that or do the same thing, or that we would have the same experience either. And there are times when I've appreciated someone's process more than the product that they ended up creating. It's been the other way around as well, where I'm like, hey, you know what? That sounds like really cool thing, and you sound like a really intelligent guy, but that movie bored me to tears. So I appreciate the interview more than I appreciate the movie. And that way, and sometimes it goes the other way around. It's like, after listening to that person talk, maybe I'll give this book another shot, like maybe I'll find something in it that that I didn't find before. I mean, I'm not saying that it will salvage something that's absolutely horrible, but there've been times when a professor has opened my eyes to something,
I'll put a nod on that for, like, I just finished the Fourth World by Kirby. I finished the volume 2 of the Absolute, and it's really dated. And it wasn't until I went through all the essays. I normally hate reading all the essays at the extra stuff. And then I don't read the intros until the end. I read the whole spin,
Right.
then I go back and I read the intros. But it wasn't until that I got done and I read a couple of the different essays on exactly where it fits into the canon and why it was so important, that it bumped up my love for the story more, because it had that extra context added in. And I was like, it was the first time I think the extra content matter really played a role in my experience of the book, to a large degree.
Yeah. I had something similar, not that where I didn't like, I loved From Hell, but then when I read Alan Moore's notes on From Hell, I went to another level of love. It was just like, it was like reading a second book, and it's that kind of thing. Again, it's very, very on a case by case basis. But I completely agree with both of you that if someone's trying to tell me a formula and tell me that this thing will always have that, I'm first of all going to treat it with suspicion, and I'm not that interested. That's a little too new agey, a little too self-help, and a little too like, I have all the answers for 1999, you can too. Like, I'm not that interested in that much. But if someone says, like, I love hearing Werner Herzog speak or David Lynch speak, because I love their work, but their approach to their work is not going to make a movie I didn't like suddenly become a movie I like, but I'm going to have a different appreciation for that and the way they approach things and the way they think about things and the way they talk about things. And then someone else can say the absolute opposite, and I can appreciate them too. Like, I can have two creators take very different approaches to character, take very different approaches to story. Someone says, I only write for the reader and I always think about what the reader will like. And someone says, I hate the reader, I only write for myself. And I'll be interested in hearing both of them, because neither of them is going to tell me a universal truth. They're only giving me their individual personal truth. And that insight is something, that I'm entertained by.
Yeah, that I agree with. That kind of stuff I really do enjoy. But there's things like, the Clarion workshops and stuff like that. And not that they're spots where they teach a formula, but if you go into any literary criticism class in the university, there's some things you can look for on a character's arc, what's required, and some of that I just want to avoid. That kind of technical stuff I just want to kind of avoid. I like the personal stuff though, but
the technical stuff is also very, like, I mean, you mentioned Joseph Campbell earlier, and I'm really not a fan because it's so untrue. But the funny thing is, and I was watching a video game essay about Star Wars, and they were talking about Joseph Campbell, and then it's true that he says there are only 7 stories in the world, and the monomyth exists in all cultures, etc. And it's a big whitewashing kind of thing, because that's not true. He's just picking and choosing. There's a lot more, and there's a lot of variation. And he's kind of got a thesis first, and then he's taking stuff from Asia and from Africa, and he's just ignoring certain parts of it to make it fit his theory. There's all of that. The 7 things or 8 things that are taught in like high school are not what's in the book. In the book, there are like 18, and many of them are very racist and very misogynistic, saying that women can never be action and blah, blah, blah. All of those things are conveniently left out. But because that has been used as a screenwriting guideline, that text becomes very interesting way of studying American film after the 60s. You know, from like 1977, from Star Wars onwards, because everyone follows that formula. So it's not like it has spotted a pattern; it has
Spawned.
generated a pattern. Yes, it has spawned a pattern in a particular context. So everyone who reads that book then follows that, and then it becomes kind of like a self-fulfilling prophecy where you're like, oh, look, the hero rejects the call. And you're like, yeah, only because they read it in that book and then they knew that they had to put it in their screenplay. You know, it's not something that's there in the Tale of Genji or the Epic of Gilgamesh at all. You know, it's... but anyway, the point is that the process stuff is fascinating, and I think when we come back, you know, bringing this back to our concluding statement for this, I think when we reread, we take on the role of that scholar, we take on the role of the, you know, the expert, because we are analyzing it more than once. We are comparing it to what we had before. We are seeing what the differences are. We are noticing things that we hadn't noticed before. We are being reminded of things that we had forgotten, and that allows us to draw the connections and to draw the dots. And I think that's what I love. You know, that's why I think rereading is such a vital exercise. It's like that's where the meat of the matter truly comes to the forefront for us as readers. You know, which is why I'm so happy that we've done these episodes. You know, these back-to-back things.
Yeah, I mean, I feel especially with comics, the big thing that stands out to me compared to a lot of other mediums to do with like rereading and re-experiencing is you can really shift your focus. So like you mentioned a little bit earlier, actually, about like if you're a parent, you experience something maybe differently than before you were a parent. And I think that something to do with everything being somewhat equal on the page, and they're not necessarily being like one voice narrator of the lead character or something in a movie or something like that, allows you to shift the focus to whatever you want the focus to be while you're kind of reading a book. So you could read the same book 6 times and focus on a different main character in your head depending on where you're at, you know, and I think that's really interesting and you know, really opens things up. And to get back to what you were saying a little bit kind of earlier, it then makes it not just I'm trying to re-hit that same high that I had in the past, but actually I'm getting a slightly different experience than I had in the past. And therefore it's something that's fulfilling in a new way, as well as your nostalgia. It's not just one or the other kind of thing.
Exactly. And I think that's very well observed, because the pace of reading is up to the reader. You know, so just the way it is in prose, but in prose it's still a sort of linear, and you can go back and read the sentence you did before, but you're still, but in a comic, at least a print comic, it's sort of simultaneously presented to you two pages at a time. And we know that you can cheat and look at the bottom right hand corner and know what's coming, and then you get a different kind of feel to the story. But yeah, the second time you read it, you can read it slower. You can spend more time on a certain panel and less time on another panel. You can skim, you can do all of this kind of stuff, and you can do it with a sort of simultaneous presentation in a way that you can't anywhere else. And that's part of the same idea. Like you're doing the co-authoring as a reader. You're doing the filling in, you know, between the gutter, blood in the gutter, as you know, Scott McCloud puts it. You're putting the blood in the gutter, but you're also modulating time. Like the comic artist is modulating time in one way because they're stretching it out or pushing it together, but you're also modulating time. So you are making the moments last longer or shorter according to you. So your experience becomes as crucial to the story. You know, your reading process becomes as crucial to the story as their writing process, which is just a marvelous thing.
Yeah, because I find especially on rereads of things, like I'll go back Like, so if I was like reading a book the first time and I noticed something through it, I might flick back to like a certain page and be like, wait, did he say that on a previous page? But when I'm doing it on a reread, I might go back and reread that whole issue and then kind of go through it, you know, because I'll be taking the time to try and investigate a little bit more than maybe I would have the first time round.
Yeah.
And again, it just builds the overall experience because I've now had that recap right before reading this new section rather than it being just something that I remembered.
Right. I think on that note, gentlemen, thank you very much for this wonderful conversation as always, and thank you everyone in the audience and the comments. Gore Vidal says there are some books which are infinite. I think that's a lovely way to put it.
Yeah. Thanks, Highland G. Thanks for getting us hosted and getting us back together. And again, next month we've got the Strangers in Paradise read/reread. So issues 1 through 31, and we'll have a big expanded panel, which is going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, looking forward to that one. I'm gonna have to put some time into reading though.
Yeah, start today.
I've got a calendar reminder on next Thursday to start reading Strangers in Paradise, figuring out about how many issues I want to read every couple of days. So start putting the time and enjoy it.
Yeah, we can't be caught unawares. So calendar reminders are a good idea. Well, thank you everyone. Thank you everyone in the audience as well.
Thanks guys. Thanks for watching.
Bye.